Chapter 1 The inspection team is here. See Circle Calendar 1492. About 30 years before the Battle of Marineford. North Sea. The sun is shining, and the cool sea breeze blows ripples on the sea. A warship flying a snow-white seagull flag is sailing slowly on the sea at a steady speed, and a huge sail with the black word, Justice, is raised on the towering mast. Guion. My Guion, I like you, please accept my love. On the deck of the warship. A rather sloppy-looking naval lieutenant knelt on one knee with a gorgeous slide and exaggerated movements, holding a bunch of bright roses in both hands, looking at the beauty in front of him eagerly. In front of him was a tall girl with long black wavy hair. She wore a righteous cloak of a major in the headquarters, a pink suspender short-sleeved shirt, and only hot pants on her lower body, revealing a pair of white and round long legs. Major Kaji is so brave. Come on, Major Kaji. Accompanied by Kaji's public declaration of love, other sailors on the deck cheered excitedly. Some people scattered colored paper, some blew trumpets, some fired salutes. Someone even raised a banner that read, Major Kaji's 38th Confession. As if inspired by the shouting and enthusiasm of his subordinates behind him, Kaji's heart was suddenly filled with unparalleled confidence. While raising the rose, he also flirted with shaking the greasy hair on his head, revealing an expression that he thought was extremely handsome. Guion, accept my love, there is no better man in the world than me. Guion. Her mouth twitched, and she said in a faint tone. Kaji, you are a good person, but we are not suitable. The deck suddenly became extremely quiet. The sound of trumpets, cheers, and salutes all stopped abruptly. The sailors looked at Major Kaji, who was kneeling on one knee with flowers in his hands, with pity, and suddenly found that his back looked so desolate and bleak. Thinking of this, their noses couldn't help but feel a little sour. Major Kaji is so miserable. I have confessed so many times. Ah. They walked over subconsciously and were about to speak to comfort him, but unexpectedly, Kaji, who was motionless, suddenly turned his head, and his sloppy face was covered with 2 lines of tears. Did you hear it? Kaji bit his lower lip, and his eyes were full of tears. That Major Kaji, we all heard it. Actually, you don't have to be discouraged. That's right, man. The sailors couldn't help but comfort him. Guion actually praised me as a good person. ! Kaji suddenly jumped up from where he was standing, his eyes sparkling with dazzling light in his tearful eyes, and his face flushed with excitement. She finally admitted me. What does this mean? It means that as long as I continue to confess my feelings, maybe she will agree to date me next time. The Navy. Is she praising you? You are a good person, is that a good thing? They looked at each other with twitching eyes, their expressions were stiff and awkward, and after exchanging glances implicitly, they all smiled and nodded. Yes, yes. That's right. Yes, that's right. I knew it. Kaji immediately cheered and clenched his fists. She is testing my patience, and I finally understand your good intentions, Guion. He turned his head and said with a smile. Actually, you don't need to test me. After all, we have known each other for so long. Don't you know how I feel about you? Come on, give me a kiss. Cake pouted and moved closer to Guion. Bang. The next second, he flew backwards like a cannonball, hit the mast, and then slid down like a pile of mud. 2 lines of bright red nosebleed flowed from his nostrils, and his body twitched from time to time. The sailors next to him seemed to have already gotten used to this scene. They put away all kinds of support tools and performed their own duties as if nothing had happened. After the farce ended, Guion rubbed his temples and sighed helplessly. She opened the military document in her hand again, which contained a Navy file. Name: Luo Jess Darren. Age: 19. Birthplace: North Sea, orphan. Position: Head of the North Sea 312 Branch Base. Rank: Colonel of the Navy Headquarters. Ability: suspected to be the ability of the devil fruit that controls metal, details unknown. Evaluation: a very ambitious person, who acts decisively and ruthlessly, is straightforward, has a strong influence in the North Sea, has amazing potential, and can be included in the selection of officers training camp. Note: there are serious problems with personal lifestyle. Below this table are rows of densely packed records and merits of eliminating pirates. In addition, the file is also accompanied by a photo provided by the Navy Photo Department. Guillaume casually scanned it. He glanced at the photo, and his black agate eyes flickered. The man in the photo had black hair and black pupils, with deep facial features and eyes as deep as stars, exuding a wild and unruly temperament. This guy is quite handsome, he's almost ready to challenge me. At this time, Kaji also put his bruised head over and sighed. So this guy named Darren is the target of our investigation. Guillaume glanced at Kaji, who still had 2 tissues stuck in his nostrils, and resisted the urge to beat up this shameless guy again, and said in a calm tone. Yes, this guy is calling the shots in the North Sea, just like the local emperor of the North Sea, and the secret intelligence claims that he also has private cooperation with underground forces, the mafia and many countries in the North Sea. According to Sister He, Darren is a very dangerous and capable person. This time we come here, in addition to awarding him the medal on behalf of the headquarters, we also have the responsibility of investigation. Besides, this is just my task, why are you following? She looked at the shameless guy in front of her with dissatisfaction. I have a mission, but this bastard Kaji has to follow me. Where you go, I go. Kaji winked and smiled, then muttered with some disapproval. But this guy is just a colonel in the headquarters. Why does Suru take him so seriously? The sister Suru mentioned by Guillaume is the chief of staff of the Navy headquarters and the core figure of the justice force in the whole world. Shouldn't the people who can be taken seriously by Suru be great pirates like Whitebeard, Golden Lion, and Roger? And this guy is just a colonel in the headquarters stationed in the 4 seas, although he is 2 levels higher than me in rank. But this is only because I grew up in the headquarters and have not had time to accumulate enough military merits to be promoted. If I start to carry out missions, I can easily surpass this guy. Guillaume shook his head and said. No, Sister Suru must have her reasons for saying that. Kaji rolled his eyes. So if there is really a problem with the review, should we take action? He couldn't help but snap his fingers as he spoke, looking eager to try. For some reason, he had the urge to beat this guy up when he saw the photo in the file. He couldn't tell the reason. It's definitely not because he looks more handsome than me. No, we just need to report to the headquarters. Guillaume slowly closed the file and turned to look at the sea in the distance. The cool sea breeze blew over the vast sea, making her long black hair dance. She remembered the instructions given to her by Sister He before she set out, and also remembered the various rumors about Darren that she had heard from the headquarters before. The North Sea, the most chaotic sea in the 4 seas. While her thoughts were flying on the distant sea, the outline of a heavily guarded military base slowly emerged in the mist. We'll be there soon, Guillaume said lightly. The military horn gradually sounded on the observation deck of the warship. The loud military horn sounded far away, and the same military horn sounded from the direction of the 321 Navy branch in the distance. Echoing each other. Prepare to land. Guillaume turned to the Navy and said. Soon, the warship slowly sailed into the port of the 321 Navy branch. Rows of Navy soldiers armed with live ammunition were stationed on land, forming a military square with a solemn momentum. This North Sea Navy is a bit unusual. Kaji stroked his chin, looked at the 321 branches stationed Navy, and couldn't help but comment. Although the 321 branch is the largest and most powerful branch in the North Sea Navy system, the quality of the Navy in the 4 Seas region is notoriously low, and it is a well-known fact that it is far behind the headquarters. But Kaji found that the mental outlook of these Navy was quite tough, and everyone exuded a fierce momentum, with tough eyes, and the guns and sabers on their bodies were top-notch goods. Judging from this momentum and equipment alone, even the elite of the headquarters are no more than this. Something is wrong. That guy named Darren was able to train the North Sea Navy to this level. Guillaume and Kaji couldn't help but exchange glances, and both saw the confusion in each other's eyes. Salute. At this time, a 20-year-old Navy major wearing a military cap stepped out of the square formation and shouted loudly. As soon as the words fell, all the navy in the port saluted. Guillaume and Cake returned the salute and walked off the warship. "Major Flying Squirrel, nice to meet you, hello." Guillaume stretched out his hand and looked at the man with dark purple hair and a resolute and cold face in front of him. Relevant information also emerged in his mind. Flying Squirrel, Lieutenant Commander of the Navy, Deputy Base Commander of the North Sea 321 Branch, and the left and right arm of Base Commander Rogers Darren. Flying Squirrel shook Guillaume's hand and said in a deep voice, "Welcome Major Guillaume and Major Cake to come for inspection." Although they are at the same level in military rank, Guillaume and the other two are from this department, represents the authority of the Navy headquarters, so a certain degree of respect is still necessary. "We are all colleagues, no need to be so polite." Guillaume smiled, but looked around. "Where is Colonel Darren?" Flying Squirrel's face froze slightly, and he was a little hesitant. "Captain Darren is still busy." "Still busy." Guillaume frowned, and suddenly saw a gorgeously decorated official ship docked at the port. The official ship was decorated with colorful ribbons, and the flag of the kingdom was flying on the mast. "Is this the official ship of the Kingdom of Yadis?" Guillaume recognized the flag on the official ship, and her expression was suddenly as cold as frost. She remembered the rumors about Darren that she had heard before at the headquarters, and subconsciously bit her silver teeth. This official ship is obviously of female style, so its owner. Could it be? Guillaume had a bad premonition in her heart, gritted her teeth and took a step, walked straight past the Flying Squirrel, and strode towards the base commander's mansion. Her mind was full of rumors about Rogers Darren's corrupt life, depravity and lust. Well, the old author has a new book. This one continues to talk about pirates with everyone. It is an authentic Navy story without system and plug-in. In addition, Lauma also reminds that the justice of the protagonist in this book is not so pure. If you want to see heroism, you can go and read the previous book. Finally, as always, I wish all readers good luck. Chapter 2 Chaotic Sea, Fallen Navy. Darren woke up from a soft big bed. The high-nose bridge, the deep eyes like stars, the sword-like eyebrows, and the short black hair set off his unruly temperament. He slowly stood up from the bed, his naked upper body was covered with all kinds of hideous scars, and his rough muscle lines added a bit of wildness to him. Always handsome. "Lord Darren, are you awake?" A numb and tender voice came from under the soft quilt. A tender and mature face poked out from under the quilt, and the graceful body outlined by the curves under the quilt was a description that could not pass the review. The woman's watery eyes looked charmingly at the tall man standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling glass, her expression full of conquered satisfaction. She had never seen such a perfect man, wild, domineering and unruly. Although last night was her first time because her husband liked homosexuality, the man in front of her gave her unimaginable pleasure. Darren came to the window sill, picked up a fine cigar from the crystal coffee table, lit it, took a deep breath, and smiled. "Well, you continue to sleep, dear." Although he said dear, this woman was just a passerby in Darren's hunting career. He would forget it soon. Although this noble lady tasted really good. Darren casually put on a loose white shirt, opened his chest, served himself a glass of whiskey, picked up the latest newspaper, and read it while drinking whiskey. The great pirate, world destroyer, Bondi Waldo sank the official ship of the world government. The world nobles, the celestial dragons, were furious and offered a high reward of 200 million berries. The ward pirates may become the biggest threat to the government. The great pirate Roger set sail again. The latest whereabouts are in the weakest East China Sea. The great pirate Golden Lion Shiki recruited troops in the New World and tried to form the world's largest pirate fleet. The great pirate Kaido and Charlotte Linlin fought a war in the New World, causing a small island to be razed to the ground. A series of shocking news headlines appeared in front of Darren, making his eyes narrow subconsciously. It's really lively, this era. He slowly closed the newspaper, took a sip of whiskey, and lit a high-end cigar with gold-stamped patterns. The strong smell of tobacco stimulated his throat, cheered him up, and fell into deep thought. Yes, Darren is a time traveler. It's just that he is different from other time travelers. He doesn't have any system or golden fingers of the chosen son. His only advantage is that after the fusion of souls, his perception and control of himself are much more accurate than ordinary people. He traveled to this pirate world 5 years ago. From a low-level Navy private, he finally climbed to his current position. Although the North Sea is outside the Grand Line, it is the most chaotic, barbaric, and filthy sea among the 4 seas of East, South, West, and North. It doesn't have the peace of the weakest sea, East Sea. It doesn't have the prosperity of trade in the West Sea. It doesn't have the stability of the sparsely populated South Sea. The North Sea is full of mafia fights, underground forces fighting, endless wars between kingdoms, and rampant pirates. All of this makes the North Sea a nightmare for countless naval governance. From an ordinary marine to the base chief of the 321st branch, and even about to be awarded by the headquarters, how many near-death experiences and intrigues Darren has experienced. I'm afraid even he himself can't remember clearly. The wounds on his body alone are enough to prove everything. Darren is extremely indulgent in his attitude towards life because he knows how hard it has been. After all, he is in the year 1492 of the Hyuan calendar. In this era, the Battle of the Valley of Gods has ended for several years, and the entire world order is in chaos. Roger has not yet completed his great voyage and become the Pirate King in the world. Golden Lion has not yet gone to Marineford to give his head, and is still dreaming of ruling the sea. Whitebeard is still collecting suns all over the sea, and his golden hair like a golden crown is still flourishing. Kaido has not yet become the famous Kaido teacher in later generations, and now he is still stubborn and often seeks suicide in the Navy. Charlotte Linlin has not yet become a steel balloon like Big Katakana Middle Mom, that is like a meat mountain, and still maintains a good figure, looking for a suitable stallion on the sea. Red Hair is still an intern, Buggy has not become the emperor, and King Luffy has not even been born. In this era, there is no balanced pattern of the 4 emperors dividing the new world, and there is no system of the 7 warlords of the sea. There is only chaos and fighting. In this era where the whole world is suffering from the ravages of pirates. In this era where big pirates and big bosses are running around the world. Even the Navy, which is regarded as the best profession for wretched development by countless predecessors, is a profession that puts your head on the belt. Darren himself could not tell when he would die in the battle, so of course he had to live a better life. It was not easy to travel through time once, so he naturally had to live happily. Even if he was a Navy, he could not be a miserable Navy. He had to drink the best wine, smoke the strongest cigarettes, and sleep with the most beautiful women. This was his life principle. Whether it was depravity or corruption, these so-called reputations were actually not important at all. He was not a pirate, so what did he need reputation for? The North Sea Navy never relied on a good reputation to get promoted. Not to mention, his former superiors, Borsellino and Sakaski, were also from the North Sea. Their reputations were not that good either. But now they have gone to the headquarters, and after graduating from the officer training camp, they have been promoted step by step, becoming the future admirals in the eyes of everyone in the Navy. Of course, playing and joking aside, Darren's standards for improving his own practice and strength are as strict as his standards for choosing women. As he thought about it, he adjusted his breath, gradually concentrated his mind, and immersed himself in the perception of his body. The fusion of souls caused by the crossing produced some kind of magical talent, which made his perception of himself accurate to a degree that ordinary people could not imagine. In order to facilitate analysis and recording, after exploring for the past few years, he successfully visualized this feeling roughly, using numbers as the unit of measurement, and compared it with the Warring States generals he had seen, and made a personal attribute table. This seems unreasonable, but even such an outrageous thing as crossing happened, it can be accepted. Physique, 58.103. Strength, 53.831. Speed, 57.539. Fruit, 71.345. Physique represents the body's defense, vitality and endurance. Strength is pure arm strength, body strength, and instantaneous explosive power. Speed is the speed of movement and short-distance sprint burst. As for the fruit, it is the degree of control of the devil fruit. The reference of this data is a specific example, and the maximum value is 100. For example, the reference of physical strength is naturally the strongest creature on land, sea and air, in the original plot, Kaido. Kaido's terrifying defense that cannot cause damage without advanced Ryuo, Darren estimated that his physical strength should be around 90 points. Well, the physical strength has indeed increased by 0.03. Darren carefully felt his body and smiled. An accidental discovery of his own was finally confirmed. After a 2-hour conquest, last night, I woke up refreshed today, and my physical strength has indeed become stronger. This is reasonable. According to the physiological knowledge mastered before the crossing, moderate exercise can increase the body's testosterone level, male hormone, and release a large amount of dopamine, which can promote muscle growth. 0.03 may not seem much, but a trickle of water will last for a long time, and a mosquito is still meat. Yes, this is how Darren has figured out the use of his talent after years of hard work. Through precise perception of the body and accurate feedback like data, he can find the most suitable way of practice for his own growth, so as to continuously improve his strength. Just at this moment. Swish. The door of the room was suddenly cut open by a sharp sword light. A tall figure with long black hair walked in with a cold and angry look. Colonel Darren, as the incoming admiral of the North Sea, you actually did such a ridiculous thing in the naval base. It's too much. Guillaume, holding a golden sword, glanced at the woman hiding under the quilt on the bed, huddled in fear, his eyes almost spitting fire, and said something that stunned Kaji behind him. This is the wife of the governor of the kingdom of Yadis. I would like to remind the big guys that because the time span of this book is very long, it will be written all the way from Roger's era to the Top War, and the timeline here at the beginning is too early, so many characters are still very young. They don't have much experience yet. They are still quite immature, and their ideas have not formed our impression of the original book. In this book, you will see the young dragon, Gion who insists on pure justice, the ignorant cake, Aokiji who still insists on burning justice, and the ambitious old sand. But please believe in my ability, I will shape each character well, and as time goes by, they will gradually grow and get closer to the original plot. Chapter 3 I am caring for the people. This is the wife of the governor of the kingdom of Yadis. After the voice fell, Gion seemed to feel ashamed, and a touch of angry blush stained her face. Darren, this bastard, actually did such a shameful thing in the naval base. This is simply unacceptable and intolerable for Gion, who grew up in the headquarters and received the pure justice education from the Crane staff. Not to mention, she came from the headquarters this time and also had the responsibility of review and supervision. If this kind of thing gets out, how bad will it affect the reputation of the Navy? Darren is simply a shame for justice. Unexpectedly, Darren, the instigator, looked like nothing happened. He showed a charming smile on his face and stood up slowly. Oh, it turns out to be Major Gion and Major Kaji. You have come all the way from Marineford. You must have worked hard. He held a cigar in his mouth and extended his hand generously. Welcome to the North Sea 321 branch. Gion looked at him coldly, without any intention of shaking hands. Darren shrugged indifferently, took out a cigar and handed it to Kaji who was standing next to him. Major Kaji, I have heard of your name for a long time. Kaji's eyes lit up when he saw the cigar Darren handed over. The cigar was branded with gold-plated patterns, which clearly came from the West Sea and was a high-end cigar exclusively for the nobles. He subconsciously wanted to take it, but seeing Gion's fiery eyes, he immediately retracted his hand in embarrassment. Hey, Darren, is this woman really the wife of the governor of the kingdom of Yadis? Kaji lowered his voice and asked secretly. Darren smiled but said nothing. Kaji immediately took a breath of cold air. Beast. He cursed in his heart. He saw the appearance of Lady Margaret, mature and charming, and still had charm, but she was just given to this guy. How could he be so good-looking? Why didn't he have such luck? The most important thing is that she is the wife of the governor. This identity. It's exciting to think about it. Cough cough. Kaji couldn't help but grit his teeth and said. Colonel Darren, your behavior is not good. The tone sounded a little sour. Guillaume turned back and glared at Kaji, then turned around and bowed deeply to the governor's wife hiding under the quilt to apologize. I'm sorry, Madam Margaret, this is our Navy's negligence. For this incident, I am a member of the inspection team from the Navy headquarters, Lieutenant Guillaume of the Navy headquarters. Please rest assured that we will thoroughly investigate Colonel Darren's evil deeds and punish him severely. While speaking, Guillaume secretly swore in his heart that he must report this matter to the headquarters. There must be no black sheep like Darren in the Navy. At this time, Madame Margaret carefully poked her head out of the quilt and glanced at Darren, who was standing there smoking a cigar. A touch of shyness flashed in her charming eyes, and she whispered softly. That, Major Guillaume, actually I volunteered. I like Colonel Darren very much. Guillaume was stunned. Kaji was dumbfounded. They originally thought that Darren used his strength or power to force Lady Margaret to submit. But they didn't expect. This was voluntary. Wait. They thought of the official ship docked at the port. This is a takeaway delivered to the door. Okay, 2 guests from the headquarters, let's not disturb this beautiful lady's rest. Darren smiled at this time. He put on a brand new military uniform and a wide cloak, raised his head and pointed to the direction of the door. Let's go to the office to discuss business, please come this way. 321 Branch, Base Chief's office. A huge plaque was hung on the gray wall, with the 2 characters, Jung X, written in a flamboyant style. Darren sat down at the main seat without any hesitation, lighting a cigar and saying, Major Guillaume, Major Kaji, give me some good news, have I received my commission? While speaking, he looked at the 2 people in front of him casually. This was the first time he had seen these 2 future, general candidates, after crossing over. Guillaume was tall, with a pair of long, white and slender legs, without any excess fat. Her long black hair was tied into a high ponytail, with a wide navy cape, her eyes were dark and bright, and she looked heroic. The beauty mole at the corner of her mouth added a bit of charm to her. It was just different from the impression in the animation. Guillaume was only about 18 or 19 years old at this time, and looked quite immature, but she had already begun to show her charm. As for Kaji next to him, well, it was quite sloppy. He stood there with a cigarette in his mouth and his hands in his pockets, his eyes darting around and glancing at the cigar on the table from time to time. He looked so wretched. He was only about 20 years old, but he had a kind of vicissitudes that only 40 years old have. He looked a little anxious. They are all young second-generation officials. Darren felt a little emotional. Ad Kaji is okay, her background is quite approachable. Guillaume is a veritable, second generation. Not to mention her amazing talent, her background is also ridiculously high. Vice Admiral Suru, the Chief of Staff of the Navy headquarters, regards her as her own sister, and Admiral Sengoku takes good care of her. It can be said that she is the chosen child who was spoiled by a group of big men in the Navy. Even the strongest Navy, and hero, Garp is called Little Garp, in her mouth. This treatment is really excessive. Comparing people is like comparing dead people. I climbed up to the rank of colonel from the bottom with great difficulty, while Guillaume started as a major when he went out to sea for the first time. Not to mention that everyone can see at a glance that Guillaume and Kaji came to the North Sea this time, seemingly to perform a mission, but in fact they came to gild themselves. When the mission is over in a few months, they will return to the headquarters. With their rich resumes, the 2 of them can directly enter Zephyr's officer training camp, and they can enter the core decision-making level of the Navy after graduation. It's really enviable. But it's obvious that Guillaume and Cake were still quite young at this time, with a kind of pride and innocence unique to young people. It's quite normal. Hearing Darren's words, Guillaume, who was still angry, snorted coldly and took out a letter of appointment. Congratulations, Colonel Darren, from this moment on, you are the highest commander in charge of the entire North Sea Navy's military affairs. Darren took the letter of appointment and looked at it. Letter of appointment. From now on, Rogers Darren, the base chief of the North Sea 321 branch and the colonel of the headquarters, will be the admiral of the North Sea. He smiled with satisfaction. The position of admiral is only established in the 4 seas outside the Grand Line. It is a specific position with a rank of colonel of the headquarters. The admirals of the 4 seas of the East, South, West, and North have the highest command authority over all naval bases and justice forces within their respective jurisdictions. They are directly responsible to the headquarters of Marineford and are the most powerful people in the 4 seas. Although the letter of appointment or not has no obvious impact on his power, after all, the entire North Sea Navy is under his control. But who would think that his position is too high except for Garb? Besides, with the title and position of North Sea Admiral, some things can be done more conveniently. Sakaski is still a man who keeps his promise. Darren muttered to himself. Thank you for your help. He raised his head and smiled heartily. How long will you stay in the North Sea? Guillaume said calmly. It may be as long as half a year or as short as 3 months, depending on the time of the review. Colonel Darren, for the sake of confidentiality, during this review, the identities of Major Cake and I as members of the review team will be kept confidential throughout the process, and we will all say that we are your adjutant. Darren smiled. No problem, Guillaume, please give me more advice in the future. The Naval Academy in this timeline is not as large as that in later generations. It adopts the form of a training camp to select and train elites from the Grand Line and the 4 Seas branches, rather than directly training recruits. Therefore, the selection criteria for the officer training camp are very strict, and the review system came into being. As long as he passes the review, he will be selected to join the officer training camp at the headquarters, trained by the former Navy Admiral Zepha Black Arm, learn the Navy 6 styles and even hockey, and become a real strong man. Finally, he can rely on this resume to accumulate enough political resources and soar into the sky in the Navy system. Darren then turned to look at Kaji and handed him a cigar. Then, Kaji also gives me a lot of advice. Kaji took a look at the gold-plated special cigar. Even in the headquarters, he had never smoked such a good thing. For a while, he felt that the roasted tobacco in his mouth was tasteless. That, Guillaume. He looked at Guillaume eagerly. Guillaume rolled his eyes unhappily. Smoke it. Okay. Kaji took the cigar with a happy expression, couldn't wait to light it, and smoked it happily in a Yu Qian style. At this time, Guillaume suddenly asked in a cold voice. So, Colonel Darren, you still owe us an explanation for what happened just now. Even if Lady Margaret was willing, your actions will have a bad impact on the reputation and atmosphere of the Navy. And considering Lady Margaret's status as the wife of the governor of the Kingdom of Yadis, your behavior may also cause a serious diplomatic incident. When Kaji heard this, he also pricked up his ears and stared at Darren with a look of watching a good show. Humph, I'll see how you explain it. He has known Guillaume for many years and naturally knows the latter's character very well. Under the influence of the pure justice of the Crane staff, Guillaume can't tolerate any sand in his eyes. You kid, let you be so arrogant. And smoke such a good cigar. Well, to be honest, this cigar is really delicious. Guillaume, this question doesn't need to be explained, right? Isn't this very reasonable? Darren showed an innocent expression on his face. I am caring about the people, military-civilian cooperation. Ahem. Cake, who was smoking a cigar, almost choked to death, his face flushed red. He raised his head and stared at Darren in amazement. Caring for the people. Military-civilian cooperation. This actually seems to make some sense. Why didn't I think of such a perfect excuse before? No reason. Chapter 4 I'm actually a good Navy. Darren. Guillaume stared at the new North Sea Admiral in front of him with his legs crossed and his eyes frivolous, almost biting his silver teeth to pieces, and his towering chest was heaving violently with anger. Before coming to the North Sea, although she had more or less heard all kinds of unbearable rumors about this man, Lustful, depraved, corrupt, abuse of power, corrupt life, nepotism, and even had inextricable collusion and connection with the political and business circles of the North Sea, and even the mafia and underground forces. And she had made some psychological preparations in advance. But she couldn't imagine that a navy that was supposed to be just could fall to such a level. That kind of vulgar, indecent, and obscene thing turned into caring for the people, and military-civilian cooperation, in Darren's mouth. Guillaume almost couldn't look directly at these two words that should have been beautiful and joyful. What about your concept of justice? Can you live up to the Navy cape behind you by doing this? Is military discipline meaningless to you? She angrily made a three-key combo. If you do this, it will not only affect your personal image, but also bring shame to the entire Navy. As if to prove her point, she turned her head to confirm with Kaji. Am I right, Kaji? I really didn't expect that caring for the people could be so caring. What a genius. Guillaume, you are right. Kaji, who was still mumbling absent-mindedly, suddenly shuddered, and his erratic eyes immediately became righteous, and he slammed the table fiercely and stared at Darren. That's right, Darren, you are a disgrace to the Navy. Darren looked at him with a smile. So you don't want to, Major Kaji? Of course I want to. No, what I mean is, of course I care about the people. Kaji stiffened his neck and his face flushed. Darren smiled, exhaled a dragon-like smoke from his mouth, and his eyes fell on Guillaume's angry face again, and said slowly, this kind of thing is originally a matter of mutual consent. Lady Margaret is very happy, and I am very happy too. This is a win-win situation. Win-win situation bullshit. Guillaume simply couldn't accept this distorted logic, and gritted his teeth and said. But the governor of the Kingdom of Yadis will definitely not be happy. If he finds out about this, what kind of political impact will it cause? Who said that Governor Tyrell would not be happy? Darren suddenly smiled. Guillaume was stunned, and then seemed to realize something and stayed there. Kaji also opened his mouth, looking confused. An incredible thought came to their minds at the same time. Could it be? Could it be? Darren flicked the ash lightly and continued. Besides, this kind of thing is actually not a big problem. I won't hide it. Since you know it, the headquarters will naturally know it. But why has no one from the headquarters ever impeached me? General Sengoku has never held me accountable. Perhaps you have thought about this question. He stood up slowly, put his big palm on the conference table, leaned forward slightly, and was very aggressive. A faint domineering, arrogant and cold breath gradually emanated from his body. Looking at the gradually fading smile on Darren's face, Guillaume and Cake suddenly felt a chill in their hearts. Darren looked down at the two, second generations, from the headquarters in front of him, and said lightly. Because I can do things. You say I affect the image of the Navy, so you tell me, do you, the naval generals from the headquarters, Marineford, have a good image? As soon as these words came out, Guillaume and Cake were speechless. They remembered Vice Admiral Garp who picked his nose and slept late. The great Senbei, Sengoku Admiral who talked to goats and talked nonsense. They also remembered two monsters of the younger generation, Sakazuki and Borsellino. One used the most cruel means to deal with pirates, and even harmed civilians in order to complete the mission. The other was weird all day long, saying, so scary, when he saw everything. Thinking about it this way, they suddenly realized that the image of the Navy is not very good. No, that's not right. Guillaume suddenly realized that she couldn't just let this guy get away with it. But just as she was about to speak, Darren waved his hand to interrupt. That's it, you two, my training time is up. If you are interested, you can follow me. I'll wait for you on the training ground. If you have any opinions about the way I do things, I am happy to discuss it with the two elites from the headquarters. He put out his cigar, then threw a box of brand new cigars to Jaji, and then strode out of the base chief's office. When Darren stepped out of the office door, his footsteps paused. Oh, by the way, there is one more thing I forgot to say. He turned his head and said with a smile. Although I smoke, drink, greedy, lustful, I like to kill people and have a strong desire for power, but I think I am a good Navy. Compared to those noble characters, but mediocre and talentless trash, I am much better." He waved his hand with a strong smile on his face. After speaking, he walked out of the office and the door slowly closed. Guillaume and Kaji sat there in a daze. After a while, Guillaume suddenly came back to his senses. "That bastard. I don't believe in such a perverted theory." She gritted her teeth, took out the military Den Den Mushi, and dialed the headquarters signal. "Guillaume, what are you doing?" Kaji hid the box of cigars and asked curiously. "I want to report Darren's problem to the headquarters." Guillaume stared at the Den Den Mushi that kept ringing, "Bulu Bulu." Soon, the Den Den Mushi communication was connected. "Bulu. Ha 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 ha, little Guillaume, have you arrived in the North Sea? How is the environment over there?" A hearty laugh came out, and the Den Den Mushi vividly imitated the appearance of Admiral Sengoku of the Navy headquarters wearing a seagull hat and round black framed glasses. "Report to Admiral Sengoku, I have arrived at branch 321. Guillaume said solemnly. "But in the process of performing the review mission, I found that Colonel Darren's personal style has extremely serious problems that can affect the image of the Navy and even cause political disputes. In the process of performing the review mission, I found that Colonel Darren's personal style has extremely serious problems that can affect the image of the Navy and even cause political disputes." Guillaume's voice was full of anger. "Oh." Sengoku's puzzled voice came from the Den Den Mushi. "What's the problem? In my impression, Darren is quite capable. Very capable. I don't know if it was Darren's words, caring for the people, that led her astray, but Guillaume always felt something was wrong when she heard this." She opened her mouth, her face gradually turned red, and she hesitated. He. This matter was too shameful, so she couldn't even say it. Kaji next to her directly snatched the Den Den Mushi and said angrily. "He actually slept with the wife of the governor of the Kingdom of Yatis. Warring States. The other side of the Den Den Mushi. Marineford, the Admiral's office, the Navy headquarters." Warring States looked at Kaji on the Den Den Mushi with a face full of righteous indignation, and scolded. "General Warring States, I strongly suggest that Darren, the bastard, be dismissed and investigated. That's the wife of the governor of the kingdom. She still looks charming and very beautiful." Zhang was very upset. "No, we can discuss this matter. Why do you always mention Lady Margaret's appearance?" "Well, it turns out that's the matter." Zhang muttered. Guillaume and Cake were both confused when they heard the reply from General Zhang. "What the hell is, well. That's it. General Zhang, your attitude." Guillaume was a little dissatisfied. Zhang scratched his head and said. "Guillaume, there are some things you don't know. Darren does have many problems. This is very clear to me and your sister Crane. The problem you mentioned, is actually not the first time. Your sister Crane has a lot of complaints and reports about Darren in the Navy Administration and Review Department. Similar things, as far as I know, there are probably hundreds if not 1,000. This sentence made Kaji dumbfounded and trembled all over. If not 1,000, there must be hundreds. That is to say, Darren, that bastard, actually, cared, for hundreds of noble ladies and young ladies like Margaret. Military-civilian cooperation, hundreds of times. What a beast. He took a few puffs of his cigarette. Guillaume was even more incredulous. Then why was he promoted to the Admiral of Beihai? If he continues to mess around like this, the whole Beihai will be messed up by him. Hearing this, Zhang sighed in his heart that Guillaume was still too young and immature. It seemed that it was necessary to let her go to Beihai to see at this time. Guillaume, do you have a fax machine next to you? Guillaume glanced and found a fax machine in a corner of the office. Yes. I'll send you a document, and you can destroy it in time after reading it. Soon, accompanied by the da sound of the fax machine, a military document appeared in front of Guillaume and Cake. This is the performance report that Darren submitted to the headquarters when he applied for the promotion to the position of North Sea Admiral. It contains his experience as the base chief of the 321st branch in the past 2 years. Dion and Cake looked at each other, then opened the performance report and flipped through it quickly. But the more they looked at it, the wider their eyes became, and their faces were full of surprise. Do you understand now? Zhang voice was intriguing. The North Sea is very chaotic, the most chaotic sea area among the 4 seas. This sea area has a deep-rooted mafia history, with a high crime rate, and many of them run through the Great Cruise. The smuggling and black market trade routes of the road all have important bases and stations here. There are constant wars among the countries in the North Sea, and the Germa 66 led by the Evil Army, always wants to dominate the North Sea and reproduce the glory of the Germa kingdom in the past. But you should take a closer look at this performance report. During Darren's tenure, the crime rate and the number of pirates in the entire North Sea were well controlled, the mafia lived in peace, the kingdom wars ceased. The living standards of the people in each kingdom have improved significantly. This is the most stable era in the history of the chaotic North Sea. Dion was stunned and subconsciously argued. But General Sengoku, the geniuses of our headquarters, Major General Borsellino and Major General Sakaski, didn't they also serve in the North Sea? Could it be that Darren's governance level is better than theirs? She couldn't believe it. Borsellino and Sakaski are the monsters of the headquarters and have been recognized as future admirals of the Navy. Hearing Dion's words, Sengoku's mouth twitched, his expression became more depressed, and he sighed. Dion, you still don't know enough about those 2 guys. During Borsellino's tenure in the North Sea, he basically wouldn't work unless the headquarters gave a direct order. The pirates were getting more and more rampant, and the headquarters couldn't stand it anymore, so they finally decided to transfer him away. What about Major General Sakaski? Dion was stunned at first, and then asked again in disbelief. Sengoku sighed again. Sakaski. Why do you think he was transferred away from the North Sea? That kid ignored the political sensitivity between the kingdoms and the safety of civilians, and implemented iron-blooded suppression on all pirates that appeared, causing extremely serious damage in many towns and countries. In the end, all the countries in the North Sea were unable to bear the harm, and more than 10 member countries expressed dissatisfaction with him and put pressure on the headquarters together. The headquarters had no choice but to transfer him away from the North Sea. Dion. Cake. Sengoku pinched his forehead and said with a headache. In short, because of the special situation in the North Sea, only Darren can master the balance well. Unlike the 2 of you who grew up comfortably in Marineford, Darren is a real North Sea man. He climbed up from a low-level private to his current position step by step. There must be something to recommend him. He has outstanding military exploits and outstanding strength. He is swift and resolute but smooth. In the North Sea, he can mix well with both the black and white worlds. And do you know? Regarding his application for promotion to the North Sea Admiral this time, both Sakaski and Borsellino expressed their support. Darren has been recognized by those 2 guys. This is enough to prove his ability and means. Speaking of this, Zhang Guiyu's words became serious, as if he was an elder caring for the younger generation. You 2, especially Dion, grew up in the headquarters, and your understanding of justice and the Navy is still limited to a very shallow level. In fact, this time, Xiaohei and I asked you to go to the North Sea with the intention of letting you gain knowledge and study hard. Darren is a very cunning and smart boy. You can learn much more by following him than staying in the headquarters. Please read it again, please do everything, thank you very much. Chapter 5. Well, let's have a discussion. The Den Mushi communication was interrupted. In the huge base chief's office, only the young Dion and Cake were left staring at each other, speechless for a long time. They grew up in the headquarters, were loved by everyone, and accepted the most orthodox justice concept. They could not imagine that a corrupt and degenerate navy like Darren could receive such a high evaluation from the Sengoku admiral they respected. What they could not believe even more was that Sakaski and Borsellino, the 2 talented and arrogant monsters, unexpectedly said the same thing to Darren. I agree with Darren's strength and means. You know, the 2 people's personality traits, ways of doing things, and personal ideas have extremely obvious and even conflicting differences. It can be said that they are one world apart. How is this possible? Guillaume sat there with a blank look in her eyes, muttering to herself. What happened after she came to Beihai brought an extremely huge shock to her, pure and young, heart. Click. At this time, the sound of a lighter lighting up sounded, interrupting her thoughts. Kaji, what are you doing? You are still smoking his cigar. Guillaume turned his head and saw Kaji next to him lighting a cigar with a lighter, and he was furious. Kaji shuddered, and seeing Guillaume's frosty face, he said in a trembling voice. Didn't General Sengoku ask us to learn from Darren? Guillaume. General Sengoku asked you to learn from him. Is he asking you to learn his bad habits of smoking, drinking, and picking up girls? Guillaume said angrily, his teeth itching with anger. Kaji quickly put away the cigar, but muttered softly. I think these are all good. Smoking, drinking and picking up girls can also make a good navy. What did you say? I said Guillaume, you are right. No, I can't accept it. Guillaume stood up suddenly, and a firm light rose in her autumn eyes again. She clenched her fists tightly. Justice must be pure, and must not harbor filth. I must stay and reform Darren, that bastard. Help him turn from evil to good. We must not let his degenerate and rebellious justice have a bad impact on the North Sea Navy. Kaji sat next to him and looked at the full-spirited Guillaume, and couldn't help but cover his face in silence. In his heart, he was thinking of Rufeifei. Military-civilian cooperation, caring for the people. He didn't know what he was thinking of, but he couldn't help laughing obscenely. Don't smile foolishly. Hurry to the training ground. Guillaume glared at him and said coldly. Kaji was puzzled. Go to the training ground. What do we do in the training ground? Training. We just arrived in the North Sea, and the road is bumpy, isn't this too tiring? Guillaume stretched out his hand to press the golden sword on his waist, with a sharp light flashing in his eyes. Didn't that bastard Darren want to compete with us? Her face was full of competitive spirit. I want to see if he deserves the title of North Sea Admiral. As a genius who is loved by thousands of people in this department, she naturally has her own pride and persistence. 321 Branch. The training ground. The sky is bright and the sea breeze is cold. The empty training ground is full of dust. Rows of weapon racks are placed on the edge of the training ground, displaying various weapons such as maces, machetes, and swords. Not far away are dozens of human-shaped stone targets, and farther away is a row of artillery used for drills. On the other side is a dilapidated abandoned warship. Many Navy members of the 321 branch have already carried out regular training here, but they glance at the figure in the center of the training ground from time to time. Darren was naked from the waist up, wearing only black military pants, doing one-finger push-ups in the middle of the training ground. 1997, 1998, 1999, 2000. After doing 2001 finger push-ups with his right hand, Darren switched to his left hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rhythm was steady, and each movement was performed to the extreme, which looked like a unique rhythm. The sharp and explosive muscles, combined with his wild and unruly temperament, looked like an aggressive cheetah in the wilderness from a distance. This was the scene that Guillaume and Kaji saw when they first arrived at the training ground. I didn't expect this guy to train so hard. Guillaume, who rushed to the training ground with great momentum, saw this scene. Although he was still quite angry, he had to admit it. Generally speaking, the Navy stationed in the Four Seas, because they are far away from the headquarters, will have relatively loose military discipline, and naturally they will take shortcuts in training. Except for the period of surprise inspection by the headquarters, most of the Navy in the Four Seas are relatively slack in daily training. But she didn't expect that Darren, a guy with a corrupt life, would be so strict with himself in training. Tisk, that's all. Kaji put his hands in his pockets, his face full of disdain, but his tone was a little sour. In fact, he was also a little shocked in his heart. After they observed for a while, Darren had completed 2,000 single-finger push-ups again. You are here, do you want to train together? He patted the dust on his hands and said to the two with a smile. Under the sun. Sweat flowed down Darren's deep jawline and the grooves of the muscle lines on his body. Coupled with his handsome face, he had a very impactful beauty. The female Navy who was secretly watching not far away had stars and hearts in her eyes. Guillaume was also dazzled by the sight, thinking, no wonder Lady Margaret is so obsessed with him. Of course, she would not be so superficial that she would be easily seduced by male beauty. It was mainly because Darren was so rare in the Navy. She thought of Sakaski and Borsellino, and looked at Kaji who was standing next to her with his hands in his pockets and looked like a hooligan. In comparison, Darren, the dirty and shameless bastard, seemed a lot more pleasing to the eye. However, she did not forget the purpose of her coming here. She must teach him a lesson so that this ignorant bastard will not be so arrogant. No need, Colonel Darren. We came here to see your strength, right, Kaji? Guillaume said solemnly, turning to look at Kaji. Ah, I don't want to. It's so tiring. Kaji blurted out, but he could sense the murderous intent in Guillaume's eyes. He straightened his chest, put his hands on his hips and changed his words. That's right, Colonel Darren. Let's see what you, the North Sea Admiral, are capable of, right? Oh, are you sure? A hint of a smile gradually appeared on Darren's lips. After all, you two are elites from the headquarters. If we really fight, I'd like to ask you to show mercy. His eyes flashed. Although Guillaume and Kaji were still very young and immature at this time, far from the level of the general candidates in the original work, they were the pride of heaven who grew up under the big guys of the headquarters. Being from the North Sea, he really wanted to know how strong they were. And most importantly, he was worried that he had no chance to find a reason to bring these two from the headquarters. The invigilator from the ministry was given a lesson. After all, the Navy is a violent law enforcement system, and in the final analysis, it speaks with strength. Only by beating them down can they be made obedient. Otherwise, they will always find fault with them, which is not good, and many things will be extremely inconvenient. Don't worry, Colonel Darren, I will control the strength for the sake of the cigar you gave me. Kaji grinned and rolled his eyes cunningly. He suddenly realized, isn't this the best opportunity to beat this guy up? Guillaume slowly drew out the famous sword at his waist, his expression angry and cold. Since reason doesn't make sense, she will use strength to convince this lustful and depraved bastard. The three of them have their own ulterior motives, and they all showed sinister smiles at the corners of their mouths. Chapter 6 Don't hit him in the face. The dust was flying on the training ground. Darren, Guillaume and Kaji faced each other from a distance, gradually emitting an imposing aura. The yellow sand rolled, and the wide cloaks behind Guillaume and Kaji were rustling in the cold sea breeze. The Navy of the 321st Branch Base had heard the news and surrounded the training ground, looking forward to the next scene with wide eyes. Deputy Base Commander of the Flying Squirrel, do you think Base Commander Darren will lose? A young Marine asked the Flying Squirrel with his arms crossed. The Flying Squirrel wearing a military cap smiled and did not answer. Losing is not in that guy's dictionary. To be more accurate, to what extent will the two, proud sons of heaven, from the headquarters be abused? So, Colonel Darren, who do you want to spar with first? Kaji said eagerly, and shook his not much hair in a coquettish manner while speaking. Noticing that many female Marines at the 321 base were looking at them expectantly, he became more and more proud. He had received guidance from many masters at the headquarters, and even General Sengoku praised his talent. Among his peers, no one could compare with him except Guillaume. He could already imagine in his mind that he would knock Darren down neatly, and then those female Marines would look at him with admiration and enthusiasm. Thinking of this, Kaji couldn't help but giggle. Darren glanced at him and shook his head. No, save some time, you guys go together. Kaji and Guillaume were both stunned when they heard this, and then they were both angry. This guy, what an arrogant tone. Then don't blame me for being rude. I will show mercy. Kaji gritted his teeth. We must let this mud-legged man from the North Sea see how powerful their headquarters navy is. His knees sank slightly, and the muscles of his whole body were visibly tensed. Bang! A pit exploded on the ground under his feet, and the amazing force pushed Kaji's body. His figure shot out from the spot like a cannonball, rushing towards Darren at an extremely fast speed. It was not the shaving of the Navy 6 styles. Kaji and Guillaume had not yet entered the officer training camp and had not mastered the skills of the Superman 6 styles. It was a pure burst of speed and power. The 321st Branch Navy watching the battle on the parade ground all took a breath of cold air, and they only felt that their eyes were blurred, and Major Kaji disappeared. In less than a second, he had crossed a distance of more than 10 meters and came to Colonel Darren in an instant. With the explosion of muscles, his fist smashed towards the latter's abdomen with great force. No fancy. No real or fake. But he brought his own strong physique to the extreme. Seeing Darren in front of him still motionless and unaware of his attack, Jaji laughed in his heart. He could already imagine the ugly scene of Darren being hit by his punch and then lying on the ground vomiting. Let you show off. Let you show off your muscles and body. Let you sleep with Lady Margaret. Let you be so enthusiastic about caring for the people. Get down here. Bang. The punch finally landed, hitting Darren's well-defined abdominal muscles squarely, and waves of white air waves appeared. But the cunning smile on Jaji's face suddenly froze. It felt wrong, his punch seemed to hit a piece of iron plate. Not moving at all. Not far away, Guillaume, who was holding a famous sword and ready to attack at any time, was also stunned on the spot. Kaji raised his head in astonishment, and what came into his eyes was Darren's slightly helpless young face. That, Major Kaji, I appreciate your mercy, but please take this fight seriously. Darren smiled playfully. The corner of Kaji's mouth twitched. Kaji, what are you doing? Stop playing around. Guillaume's face flashed with doubt, and he couldn't help but shout. Kaji. He gritted his teeth, took a deep breath, and the muscles of his entire arm swelled up, and he punched Darren with great force again. Boom. Another surging wave of air spread out, and the violent wind swept up gusts of dust. The base of the 321st branch, Darren, still, did not move at all. Kaji was stunned again. Is this a block of iron? Although I haven't learned the Navy 6 styles yet, I have seen pigs run even if I haven't eaten pork. This method of resisting attacks makes the body as hard as steel, which is clearly the effect of the iron block in the Navy 6 styles. The principle of the iron block is to accelerate blood flow and speed up muscle movement. But what is incredible is that Darren in front of him clearly didn't have the feeling of boosting power when he used the iron block. I said, Major Kaji, you really don't need to show mercy, I really want to see your strength. At this time, Darren's voice sounded again slowly. Kaji, what are you doing? I said I would go all out. Guillaume said angrily. Kaji's expression was almost like crying, thinking that I didn't let him go. He gritted his teeth and punched Darren with both arms frantically. Bang 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 bang. The violent fists turned into countless fist shadows, covering the Navy colonel. The fist, which was powerful enough to easily break the rock wall, landed on Darren's chest, abdomen, legs, and even head, but failed to make the latter retreat even half a step. It didn't work at all. The figure of the naval colonel stood there motionless, like a tough reef in the storm. It didn't work. How could this be? Jaji stared at Darren's nonchalant expression and the smile that was faintly visible in the depths of his eyes, and suddenly an unbelievable thought surged in his mind. Could it be? At this time, he saw Darren in front of him suddenly grinning at him. Have you fought enough? If you have, it's my turn. Jaji was stunned, and only felt a piercing chill surging from the soles of his feet, straight along the spine into his forehead. A rough big hand reached out to him at lightning speed, and was wildly enlarged in the reflection of his pupils. It was so fast, there was nowhere to escape. Kaji's face suddenly changed, and the guess in his heart finally became a reality with Darren's move. This guy has a powerful strength that can easily crush him. Don't hit my face. Kaji screamed, but the next moment the big hand had already covered his face. Under Guillaume's unbelievable eyes. Under the dull expressions of the 321st Branch Navy who gasped. Under the helpless sight of the flying squirrel. Under Kaji's pig-like screaming. Darren, who pressed Kaji's face with one hand, took a step forward with a grin. Then, He smashed Kaji's head heavily into the ground. Boom! The ground within a radius of 20 meters shook violently, and a shocking pit was formed immediately, with dense cracks spreading in it. Kaji's head sank into the deep pit, and his 2 legs in wooden clogs were hanging upside down in the air, twitching from time to time. The dust rolled like a dragon. At this moment, everyone present was grinning at this scene, their eyes twitching. It hurts just to look at it. Katakana middle dot katakana middle dot katakana middle dot. Chapter 7 Monsters appear in the North Sea. Damn it. Gion's face changed drastically when he saw this scene, and he finally realized that Darren was a very powerful guy. He was teasing them. Kaji was good at close combat, and his physical strength was extremely amazing. But his attack on Darren did not cause him any harm. Looking at Darren's naked upper body and his muscles covered with hideous scars, a thought suddenly came to Gion's mind. This guy's physical defense may have been cultivated to an inhuman level. Even under normal circumstances, the hardness is comparable to that of an iron block. When the thought flashed through her mind, Gion no longer hesitated, and her figure shot out from the spot, like a pink phantom. Her eyes flashed with a strong fighting spirit, and the golden sword in her hand burst into a dazzling cold light. Things had developed to this point, and she could no longer retreat. She and Kaji came here on behalf of the headquarters, and there were so many Navy officers around watching them, they had to save face no matter what. Be careful, Colonel Darren. The moment the voice sounded, Gion's figure had appeared in front of Darren. The golden sword in his hand broke through the air and slashed, causing a sharp explosion. Draw the sword, peach smoke. One sword fell. Swish. The golden sword fell fiercely, and blood spurted out. A hideous blood mark bloomed on Darren's chest, and a large amount of blood gushed out. The pupils of Gion's eyes suddenly shrank. Didn't hide. She looked at the naval captain in front of her with a look of astonishment, and for a moment she was a little unable to react. The blade of the famous sword in her hand was stuck in Darren's chest muscles, unable to move forward. Then she saw a smile. A cruel, pleasant, and even slightly crazy smile gradually rose at the corner of Darren's mouth, grinning an unbridled arc. Feel the breath of all things. The realm of cutting iron. Darren licked the salty blood splashed on his lips, and looked at Gion with admiration in his eyes. You are worthy of being a genius of the headquarters, and you are only one step away from being a swordsman. As soon as the voice fell, Gion felt a violent gust of wind blowing in her face, tearing her cheeks painfully. The sound of air explosions exploded in front of her. So fast. Her face changed drastically. He held the famous sword horizontally in front of him to block. Clang. A black military boot kicked heavily on the blade of the famous sword. Gion only felt an enormous force coming, and the whole person seemed to be hit head-on by a high-speed sea train, and flew out like a cannonball. Ripples of air waves spread in the void. Boom. 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 Gion's figure knocked down several heavy stone targets in succession, and then rolled a few times and fell to the ground. Countless broken stones rolled down. A blood mark overflowed from the corner of Gion's mouth, and the hand holding the sword kept shaking, and the position of the tiger's mouth was bleeding, and bursts of burning pain came. She stared at the man in the distance with an incredible face, and a storm was set off in her heart. This guy not only has a terrifying physical defense like a monster, but also has the power close to that of an adult giant. Ah, damn it, Darren, you bastard, how dare you hit me in the face? At this time, an angry roar suddenly sounded. I make a living by my face. Jia, whose face was swollen like a pig's head, pulled his head out of the deep pit with difficulty, panting, and his eyes were stained with a touch of red. His momentum changed suddenly, like a ferocious beast awakened from sleep. You actually forced me to use such power. You are proud of yourself. Jia hunched his body and gradually stood firm. The military uniform on his body suddenly swelled up, and the muscles on his shriveled body bulged and expanded like volcanic rocks, with a ferocious expression. Crackling. Accompanied by the explosion of power in his body, the ground under his feet actually showed fine cracks under the crushing of the powerful air wave. Such a terrifying scene made the faces of the Navy watching the battle change slightly. What a strong physique. Such power is hidden in the body. Is this the genius of the headquarters? They were shocked to see Major Kaji from the headquarters rushing towards Darren with great strides, and his momentum was extremely fierce. The speed increased again and again, and it was even more powerful and swift than the previous attack. It rushed horizontally towards the base commander Darren like a meteorite. Then, bang! It was blown back at a faster speed than rushing forward. Scarlet blood spurted out of his mouth, and his military uniform was torn to pieces by the violent force in an instant. After rolling on the ground for more than 10 times, Kaji curled up his body like a cooked shrimp. Kaji opened his mouth wide, like a fish lacking oxygen, and his bloodshot eyes bulged out of his eye sockets because of the pain. Ah! He vomited out a pool of sour and smelly liquid, filling the air with the smell of nausea. Quiet. The entire training ground fell into a dead silence. Under everyone's shocked gaze, the new North Sea Admiral slowly walked towards Guillaume and Kaji step by step. The tall body cast a shadow under the scorching sun, covering the two. Darren looked down at the two inspectors, sent by the headquarters to stare at him, with a sunny smile on his face. You two are really worthy of being masters of the headquarters. He blinked. Please give me more advice in the future. Damn it. Darren, you bastard, how can you be so strong? At this time, Kaji, who had finished vomiting, raised his head breathlessly, his eyes full of bloodshot, staring at Darren. Hearing Kaji's words, Darren seemed to remember something interesting, and a smile appeared on his face. Compared to real monsters, I'm not that strong, he said with a smile, and then looked down at the scar on his chest. Well, the bleeding has stopped, and it feels like it's about to scab. Well, it's fun to spar with you too. He turned around and walked to the far side of the training ground. The warm-up is over, and I have to start formal training now. Kaji and Guillaume, they were confused. The fight just now was just a warm-up for you. You were also cut by a knife. The blood is still flowing. Oh, it's almost scabbed, so it's okay. They looked at each other, and the shock in their hearts was beyond words. Boom. Just as Kaji and Guillaume were in turmoil, a series of heart-pounding earth rumblings suddenly came from under their feet. Dust and gravel kept jumping on the ground of the training ground. They seemed to have noticed something and looked up. The scene that came into their eyes made their brains go blank. 100 meters away. The man who had just crushed the two of them with an extremely arrogant attitude was holding a huge black iron chain. The rusty black iron chain was about 10 meters long, extending all the way, and the tail was connected to the abandoned warship on the edge of the training ground. As the muscles on his body bulged like hard volcanic rocks, Darren held the huge iron chain in both hands, actually dragging the 6-meter-high medium-sized warship. Slowly moving forward. One step. One step. With each step, Darren's military boots stepped out a shallow footprint on the ground of the training ground. For more novels 109,777, join, Shallow Hole. As he moved forward, the huge warship being dragged rubbed a deep groove with the ground of the training ground, causing a series of earthquakes. From the direction of Guillaume and Kaji, the seemingly tiny naval colonel dragged the warship of astonishing size. Under the scorching sun, formed a very impactful visual picture. Guillaume and Kaji were dumbfounded, opened their mouths, but couldn't say a word. You just came to the North Sea, and you don't know a lot of things. At this time, the flying squirrel came to the side of Kaji and Guillaume. He looked at the naval colonel who was struggling to drag the warship forward in the distance, and his eyes did not hide his admiration. Before Major General Sakaski was transferred from the North Sea to the headquarters, Colonel Darren was his adjutant. The dense scars on Colonel Darren's body, most of them were caused by sparring with Major General Sakaski. As soon as these words came out, Guillaume and Cake both took a breath of cold air. Those horrible scars were caused by sparring. How can this be sparring? This is clearly a fight like a beast. The man who can fight with Sakaski's monster. Cake and Guillaume's faces flushed. I'm afraid that they just tried their best, but in the eyes of that madman Darren, it was just like playing house. Another monster. Cake swallowed a mouthful of saliva with a gurgle and said dryly. Monsters appear in the North Sea. This sentence has been widely circulated in the Marine headquarters Marineford in the past 2 years. Because in this most chaotic sea among the 4 seas, 2 perverts with completely different personalities but equally terrifying emerged. Sokoski and Borsellino. They graduated from the officer training camp in less than half a year, and rose with amazing talents and unstoppable attitude, and were personally recognized by General Zepha as monsters. But now, perhaps it won't be long. Another monster will appear in this chaotic sea. His name is Rogers Darren. Chapter 8: The Road to Monsters. When the flying squirrel heard what Kaji said, he couldn't help but smile and said, "Monster. Maybe." Colonel Darren and I joined the 321st branch at the same time. I remember very clearly that on his first day of training 5 years ago. A touch of nostalgia flashed in the flying squirrel's always cold and resolute eyes. He was very thin at the time. Running 10 laps on the training ground completely exhausted his physical strength. He had to rest for half an hour to catch his breath and stand up again. Among the recruits of the same period, his physical fitness was the weakest. But he didn't give up because of this. He insisted on training every day, and almost every day he challenged his physical limits. At first, he walked with a gun barrel, and then a canoe. It took 3 years for Colonel Darren to barely drag this abandoned warship 1 meter. Compared to the natural monster, like Major General Sokoski, Colonel Darren is a monster of another level. Guillaume and Kaji both fell silent after hearing this. Clang! Darren threw down the thick iron chain and stood in the scorching sun, gasping for breath. He felt the tearing pain in his throat and lungs like a bellows. The muscles all over his body seemed to be burning, and there was a burning pain. But he had already gotten used to this kind of pain. Darren looked back at the long groove left on the ground after the warship was dragged, and roughly estimated the distance. 101 meters. Well, I finally broke my own record. He sensed his physical data again. Physique, 58.106 plus 0.03. Strength, 53.837 plus 0.06. Speed, 57.539. Fruit, 71.345. Physique increased by 0.03, and strength increased by 0.06. The growth of attributes is getting slower and slower. It seems that I have to change to a larger warship. Darren stared at his data panel, and muttered to himself. For his perception talent, this is the best use he can discover and explore. With the feedback of various data, it can be judged whether the current training method is effective. The human body has a strong ability to adapt. The same weight, external pressure, and similar training methods may achieve good training results at the beginning, but as the human body continues to adapt, the effect will gradually weaken and finally stagnate. This is a scientific explanation. Before Darren crossed over, he also roughly understood that professional athletes would also constantly change their training plans to achieve the effect of continuously improving their athletic performance. Progressive overload is a very basic principle in kinematics. It means that within the acceptable range of the human body, the load of training is continuously increased to achieve the improvement of athletic performance. However, for Darren, who has the talent of precise perception, he can more accurately use the feedback of various data to judge whether his current training is effective. So even though he experiences the hellish, torture and monster practice methods in the eyes of others every day, he is still happy. Because he can get instant feedback. Every time you do one more push-up, every time you do one more weighted squat, you can clearly see your attributes improving. It's just like a character in a game. Of course, this world is not a game, but a real one. He knows the dangers of the pirate world better than anyone else. So he practices harder than anyone else. Because only in this way can he compete with the real monsters on this sea. With the help of his talent, He firmly believes that as long as he makes inhuman efforts, he will be able to do the same as Whitebeard one day, with unparalleled strength, and easily intercept a high-speed warship with his bare hands. Then, let's start physical training. For more novels 92801, join. As his breathing gradually became stable, Darren raised his head and waved to the flying squirrel. He felt that his body load had reached its limit today. Continuing to force strength training would not only have no effect, but would cause hidden injuries to the body, strain muscles, and overdraw physical potential. Colonel Darren called me. On the other side of the school field, Flying Squirrel said to Kaji and the others, and then took a step. But he soon stopped, as if he remembered something, turned around and said with a smile. By the way, the next part is very exciting, don't blink. Kaji and Gion were stunned. Flying Squirrel did not explain much, just smiled mysteriously. Although bad taste is not his character, for some reason, seeing these two, proud sons of heaven, of the headquarters look like they have never seen the world and are shocked, I always feel inexplicably happy. Assemble! Flying Squirrel shouted coldly. In less than 20 seconds, dozens of naval soldiers around the school field had quickly gathered in the center of the school field. They seemed to have been prepared for a long time and divided into two teams. Clang! With a crisp buzzing sound, the Navy in the front row all drew out their sabers. Swish! At the same time, the Navy in the rear row also raised their flintlocks in unison. All of them held their breath. The target they locked their eyes on was Darren in the center of the training ground. Hey, are you kidding me? Kaji seemed to realize something, his face was full of astonishment, and the corners of his mouth twitched uncontrollably. Gion swallowed a mouthful of saliva with a gurgle, and said in a hoarse voice. This kind of training method can really kill people. Before they could suppress their inner shock, the flying squirrel over there had already issued an order in a stern tone. Attack! As soon as the words fell, the front row of Navy holding sabers rushed towards their base commander with great momentum. The sharp and cold saber, without the slightest mercy, slashed wildly at Darren's body. Head, face, neck, chest, back, arms, thighs, throat. Every part was taken care of properly. Clang, clang, clang. However, they seemed to be chopping on steel, with large sparks flying from the blade and then a gap. A round of slashing, the sabers were scrapped one after another, and the front row of Marines quickly dispersed. The Marines in the back row who were ready to go immediately pulled the trigger of the flintlock. Bang, 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 bang. The dense rain of bullets enveloped Darren's figure, constantly refracting and rebounding, leaving clear craters on the ground. After a round of bullets, the Marines in the back row immediately drew out the sabers at their waists and rushed towards Darren. At this time, the Marines in the front row gathered again at the position of the Marines in the back row and began to load bullets into the flintlock. They fought back and forth. Swords. Gunshots. Even from time to time, the flying squirrel dragged out a heavy artillery from the armory next to it, and took advantage of the gap between the two naval teams to fire a shot at Darren. Swords broke, bullets rang, and shells exploded. Billowing black smoke and flames rose up in the school field, raising vast smoke and yellow sand. From a distance, it seemed as if a small war was being staged. Cake and Gion, who were at the edge of the school field, stared at this horrific scene of self-mutilation in amazement. Like a wooden chicken. No iron, no dodging, no blocking. That madman, just relying on the defensive power of his own body, resisted such a fierce attack. Is this something that humans can do? Cake and Gion looked at the man who was still standing in the hail of bullets, and murmured with a pale face. Please support me in every way, and please give me full marks. Thank you very much. Chapter 9 Germa Rise. That evening. The 321st Branch Base Chief's residence. After completing the training, Darren simply washed his body and walked out of the steamy shower room. Looking at the scarred body in the mirror, which was as explosive as a cheetah, he was a little dazed for a while. Physique, 58.418. Strength, 53.890. Speed, 57.548. Fruit, 71.345. After the final anti-strike training during the training, he also had a lot of wounds on his body, but they were basically scabbed over and would probably heal completely after a good night's sleep. This was reflected in the data of physical perception, which showed that his physical strength had successfully increased by 0.312, reaching 58.418, and was one step closer to the 60-point mark. Indeed, the progress is getting slower and slower. It seems that we have to find time to transport several heavy artillery from warships to the training ground later. Darren frowned as he looked at the dense and hideous scars on his body. With his physical defense getting stronger and stronger, ordinary swords and gunshots are basically ineffective against him. The slashing of the saber and the bullets of the flintlock can only leave a shallow red mark on the surface of his skin. In today's training, most of his injuries were actually caused by the bombardment of the flying squirrel. In order to continue to improve his physical recovery and resistance to attacks, Darren knew that he had to increase the intensity. This is the benefit of the perception talent. With the precise feedback of the data, he can well control the intensity of training. It won't lead to incurable injuries, let alone fatal injuries. Instead, the training intensity is controlled within a reasonable range. Compared to the beginning, the improvement of his physical fitness data has become slower and slower, but it is still improving. Although Darren has been promoted to the governor of the North Sea and controls the naval power of the entire North Sea. But power is one thing. Darren knows better than anyone that personal strength is the basis for survival in this sea. What he has to do now is to manage the North Sea as solidly as possible before passing the examination, and going to the headquarters officer training camp, and make the entire North Sea Navy his territory, as much as possible. More power means being able to better seize training resources. On this basis, improve personal strength as much as possible. Before mastering domineering, improving strength, speed and physique is the best way to improve strength. Darren believes that he is not a monster with outstanding talents like Sakaski, so he practices harder than anyone else. According to Darren's judgment, the strength of an adult giant is about 60 points. When his physique reaches 60 points, even in normal state, his physical strength will reach the strength of the 6 style, iron block. And he is getting closer and closer to this goal. Yes, Darren is on the road of a monster. There is no shortcoming, all-round strength. The kind of strength that makes people despair. He believes that with the help of perception talent, he will one day be able to reach Kaido's terrifying and inhuman physical strength. Knock knock knock. At this time, a knock on the door sounded. Darren casually put on a bathrobe and walked over to open the door. Captain Darren. It was the flying squirrel outside the door. The ice you asked for is here. Darren nodded and smiled. Thank you for your help. The flying squirrel then gestured to the 2 Navy soldiers behind him, and soon they walked into the mansion carrying boxes of ice. Crash. The cold ice cubes were poured into the bathtub. The 2 Navy officers looked at Darren with admiration and left respectfully. What's the situation of those 2 guys now? Darren took off his bathrobe, walked into the bathtub with ice cubes floating on it without changing his expression, and immersed his whole body in the 0-degree ice water. He asked casually. Ice bath is his habit. After high-intensity training, ice bath can promote blood circulation in the body, help recovery, eliminate inflammation, and relieve soreness. The flying squirrel looked at the full tank of ice water and always felt goosebumps on his skin. Hearing Darren's question, a strange smile appeared on his face, and he said, They are probably stimulated by you and are now training in the school field. Darren was startled, and then laughed dumbly. It seems that the geniuses of the headquarters have their pride. But on second thought, the reactions of Kaji and the others are also normal. There is also a contempt chain within the Navy system. The elite of the Navy headquarters look down on the branches stationed in the Grand Line, and the branches of the Grand Line look down on the naval bases in the 4 seas. This is also normal. After all, whether it is strength, military discipline or equipment, the Navy of the headquarters has an overwhelming advantage. And the Navy of the 4 seas is even more neglected in management and military discipline because of its high autonomy and remoteness. Kaji and Guillaume grew up in the headquarters since childhood. They are well born and well loved. Their own talents are even more outstanding. How could they have thought that they would be easily slaughtered by Darren when they came to a place like the North Sea? Now, I was suddenly aroused by my own competitive spirit. But Darren, are you sure that their arrival will not affect anything? When there are no other people, Flying Squirrel, as Darren's left and right arms, usually calls him by his name directly. Darren half closed his eyes. My actions here can't be hidden from the headquarters. This so-called inspection is just a superficial effort. The shrewd old man Sengoku sent Gion and Cake here. In fact, to a large extent, he wanted me to lead them. The 3rd officer training camp is about to begin. Although they have already been selected, they still have to pretend to be gilded and accumulate resumes and merits. If the headquarters wants to move against me, I am afraid it will not be these 2 young men who come, but I have to accept the baptism of Vice Admiral Crane. The Flying Squirrel was silent for a while. I always feel that your situation is too dangerous. I guess the headquarters will find out something soon. Darren smiled and shook his head. The North Sea is too small. The headquarters looks down on it. And even if the headquarters finds out something, what can it do? If they want to check, let them check. Let them see the situation in the North Sea clearly. Darren paused and changed the subject. I heard that Vinsmoke Judge has been making a lot of trouble recently. The Flying Squirrel replied. Yes, he flaunted his power everywhere, expanded his army, led his troops to fight east and west, and threatened to behead the kings of 4 countries including the Kingdom of Yadis in order to dominate the North Sea again. Darren sneered. That guy seems to have obtained a lot of advanced weapons technology, and he must have become arrogant. Vinsmoke Judge once worked with Vegapunk, who was known as the genius scientist who is 500 years ahead of the world. In the original plot, after Vegapunk was taken away by the world government, he fled back to the North Sea with some of Vegapunk's technology. After returning to the Germa Kingdom, Vinsmoke Judge used science and technology to revive Germa 66, and later led Germa 66 to trigger the Kill the 4 Kingdoms of the North Sea event, beheaded the heads of the 4 lords of the North Sea, and drew a huge painting of the event as a memorial. Send someone to send him a message. The North Sea cannot be left to him, Germa 66. Although the review of the headquarters is just a show, if Vinsmoke Judge really turns the North Sea upside down under my rule, it will not work. He tapped the edge of the bathtub with his fingers lightly. The overlord of the North Sea is not him, Germa 66. Quote. The Flying Squirrel nodded, then hesitated for a moment, and was about to speak. Anything else? Darren glanced at him. The Flying Squirrel weighed his tone and said slowly. Recently, a new gang has come to the North Sea. They are very powerful and extremely cruel. They have defeated several well-known mafia families such as the Galen family and took over their businesses. I sent someone to check the background of this gang and found that it was not simple. He took a deep breath, his face solemn. The leader of this gang is a kid who is less than 10 years old. His name is... The Flying Squirrel exhaled slowly. Don Quixote da Flamingo. Chapter 10 The Elegant Magneto Fruit. Don Quixote da Flamingo. When Darren heard the name, he was stunned for a moment, and then a strange expression appeared on his face. As a time traveler, he was not unfamiliar with this name, and he could even say that it was a familiar name. One of the future 7 warlords of the sea, Flamingo. The biggest intermediary in the underground world who controls more than half of the world's illegal trading channels, Joker. On the surface, he is the king of Dressrosa, and he cooperates with Kaido, the Beast, in private, and he is a big villain who stirs up the world. However, at this time, the 7 warlords of the sea system had not yet been established. Kaido had not yet become one of the 4 emperors who dominated the New World. And Doflamingo was just a yellow-haired kid who had just come to the North Sea with a few subordinates to accumulate power. Yes, the background of this kid. The Flying Squirrel was vague and vaguely apprehensive. Darren smiled and pointed out bluntly. Isn't he just a celestial dragon who was deprived of his rights? Now he comes to the North Sea like a stray dog, biting people everywhere. The flying squirrel glanced at Darren. Although they had worked together for so many years, he had long known that Darren was a lawless guy who was afraid of chaos in the world. But the latter's contemptuous tone towards the world's noble, celestial dragons, still made the flying squirrel very helpless. "You are calm enough." He sighed helplessly. Although Doflamingo has been deprived of the right to continue living in the holy land of Marihoa, he still has the blood of the celestial dragons flowing in his body anyway. Now that he is holding high the banner of the Don Quixote pirates, he probably wants to expand his power in the North Sea and take root here. It's really difficult for us to deal with it. Maybe it will ruin all our plans in the past few years. He looked a little embarrassed. "Darren, do we need to report to the headquarters?" Logically speaking, Doflamingo raised the pirate flag, and as the North Sea Navy, they naturally had to attack him. But Doflamingo's identity as a celestial dragon made people afraid to act rashly. Darren pondered for a moment. Doflamingo is indeed tricky. You know, this guy was a madman who dared to rob Tian Shangjin in the original plot. Relying on his identity as a celestial dragon, he forced the world government to make concessions to him and gave him the identity of the 7 warlords of the sea. The Navy was also very afraid of his identity and did not dare to touch him easily. Although Chief of Staff Crane had attacked him many times and made him suffer a lot, Doflamingo even fled in fear when he saw Chief of Staff Crane's warship. But this is enough to explain the question, because Doflamingo is still at large. With the powerful strength of the Navy veteran, even if she is not as strong as Garp and Sengoku of the same period, it is effortless for her to conquer and arrest Doflamingo who has not grown up. But she let Doflamingo slip away repeatedly. To put it bluntly, she was concerned about his identity as a celestial dragon. "No, let me deal with that kid, you don't have to worry about it for the time being. As for the headquarters, I guess old man Sengoku will soon be unable to sit still." The flying squirrel nodded and turned to leave the mansion. Darren lay quietly in the freezing cold water, lost in thought. At a certain moment, he suddenly waved his hand. It was as if a faint arc of electricity flashed between his fingers, and an invisible, strange force field suddenly spread out. The next moment, an incredible scene appeared. A coin flew out from the pocket of the military uniform hanging next to it, and floated, flexibly and steadily above Darren's palm, quietly suspended there, as if controlled by some strange power. If someone saw it here, they would probably be shocked. Because as Darren's fingers moved, the metallic coin kept turning and flying around his palm, like a nimble butterfly. Superman-type magnetic fruit. In the original plot, it belongs to the devil fruit ability of the supernova Eustace Kid in the Era of Evil. Create a magnetic field, magnetize metal objects, and control the ability of magnetism and electricity to manipulate all metal objects such as iron. This is the spoils Darren seized in a mafia cleanup operation. After confirming that this is Eustace Kid's magnetic fruit, he ate it without hesitation. The magnet fruit is essentially a devil fruit with great development potential and unlimited upper limit, but it was developed into shit by Kid, that idiot. He could have been an elegant Magneto, but he chose to play Lego and be a Gundam. A god-level fruit with a bug was wasted in vain. At least in Darren's opinion, as long as it is properly developed, the power of the magnet fruit is definitely not inferior to the top natural system. And this naturally became Darren's biggest trump card. Thinking like this, he slowly closed his eyes. He just lay in the extremely cold ice water, the invisible magnetic field strangely enveloped the surroundings, the metal coins were dancing nimbly, and sometimes there were faint purple arcs jumping and flashing. Under the influence of the biological magnetic field, the injuries on his body surface healed quickly, and the muscles all over his body rose and fell and contracted rhythmically. This is the ability of the magnet fruit that he had just developed recently. By placing the human body in a biomagnetic field of a certain intensity, it can help the recovery of injuries and continuously improve physical fitness. Of course, even with his current strong physique, he can only last about 3 hours in this biomagnetic field. The longer the time, the greater the pressure and pain he will bear. Once the body's tolerance limit is exceeded, the internal organs will be irreversibly damaged. Time passed by. Accompanied by the effect of the biomagnetic field. In Darren's perception, his various body data will jump up every 10 minutes. Physique plus 0.01. Strength plus 0.01. Speed plus 0.01. The next day, Darren changed into a brand new military uniform and put on a white cloak. As soon as he arrived at the base commander's office, he saw Kaji sitting there listlessly with dark circles under his eyes, yawning constantly. It was clearly a look of mental exhaustion after staying up all night for training. Darren smiled when he saw this. It seemed that he really irritated this guy. "Major Kaji, good morning." He greeted him. "Morning." Kaji replied in a daze, and then he seemed to have heard the owner of the voice. He suddenly shuddered and jumped up from the sofa. "Don't hit my face." He took a defensive posture, with his hands across his eyes, mainly blocking his face. This is a psychological trauma caused by being beaten. Darren laughed and shook his head. "Don't worry, I know you make a living by your face." Kaji looked at Darren doubtfully, and then slowly put down his hand. As if he felt a little embarrassed, he stiffened his neck and snorted coldly. "You are smart." He paused and added, "You know, I didn't use my full strength in yesterday's competition. After all, you are the top leader of Beihai. If I beat you up in front of so many of your subordinates, it will not have a good impact." Darren smiled, sensibly. "Yes, Major Kaji is a genius in the headquarters. How can I be your opponent?" He took out a box of cigars and handed one to Kaji. Of course, Kaji was very satisfied with Darren's performance. He put one hand on his waist and took the cigar with the other hand, his face full of pride. "But Darren, where did you get this cigar? This kind of good stuff is rare even in the headquarters." While speaking, Kaji had already lit the cigar and puffed happily. Darren was also beside him. He sat down, crossed his legs, and lit a cigar. "I have plenty here. If you like, Major Kaji, I'll have someone send you a box later." One box. Kaji's hands trembled, and his eyes widened as if they were burned. He was not a country bumpkin who had never seen the world. This kind of cigar, which is exclusively for the nobility, is produced in the tobacco plantation of the Belman Islands in the West Sea. The cost of each cigar is more than 50,000 Baileys. There are 10 cigars in a box, and 20 boxes in a box. That is to say, a box of cigars has exceeded 10 million Baileys. And his annual salary as a major in the headquarters is less than 2 million Baileys. Where does Darren get the money? Chapter 11 Reasons for Sending Troops. At this time, Guillaume also walked into the office. Seeing Darren and Kaji sitting there smoking together like good friends, she frowned, but didn't say anything in the end. "Captain Darren." Guillaume saluted Darren. Darren smiled and waved his hand. "You're welcome, Major Guillaume." He glanced at Guillaume and Kaji casually. It can be seen that after yesterday's sparring, they looked at him with more conviction. This sea, after all, speaks with strength. "So I wonder what your schedule is today." Darren gently exhaled a dragon-like smoke and asked with a smile. Guillaume and Kaji looked at each other, and the former said with a serious face, "Colonel Darren, after observation, we found that there are certain problems with the income and expenditure of your branch." "Oh." Darren's deep eyes flashed with an interested look. "Major Guillaume, what do you mean?" Guillaume took out an intelligence document preparedly and put it on the desk. His face gradually became cold. "Colonel Darren, according to the materials provided by the headquarters and my observations. Let's not talk about the situation of other naval branches in the North Sea for now, but the income level of the Navy of the 321st branch alone is far beyond the military expenditure standard stipulated by the headquarters." Darren flicked the ash and smiled. "Isn't this a good thing? As a Navy shouldering justice, we may die gloriously at any time because of the mission of suppressing pirates. Putting aside the so-called justice, the Navy is originally an extremely dangerous profession. Without enough military pay and subsidies, who would be willing to give a fair salary to a Navy with such a small amount of money a month? Fight for the sake of justice." Guillaume bit his teeth. "Colonel Darren, you know that's not what I mean." What I mean is that the military expenditure of the branch comes from the allocation of the headquarters, which means that the military expenditure of the Navy of each branch is certain, but under your command, the naval pay standards of the 4 branches have far exceeded the limit allocated by the headquarters. Even 5 times or more than the Navy of the same level in the headquarters. So, Colonel Darren, what I want to ask is, where does this extra military expenditure come from? As soon as Darren said this, before he said anything, Kaji next to him had changed his face slightly. Looking at the high-end cigars on the table, he suddenly realized something, turned his head, and stared at Darren. Facing the questioning eyes of Guillaume and Cake, Darren just shrugged and said, "Don't you already know the answer to this question, Colonel Guillaume?" Guillaume gritted his teeth and said word by word, "You accepted a bribe." Bribe. Darren seemed to have heard a funny joke, and shrugged with a smile, No, how can it be called a bribe for the Navy's business? This is called a reasonable charge. Guillaume looked at Darren in front of him with an unconcerned look, and couldn't help but said angrily. So the rumors are true, you really have 1,000 connections with the North Sea Mafia, and even accepted their money. Do you know that those are the hard-earned money of civilians? It's because of the rampant mafia and its exploitation, countless families have been torn apart. Families torn apart. Darren couldn't help laughing. I believe you have read my performance report. Under my jurisdiction, the crime rate in the entire Beihai has been significantly reduced, and the living standards of civilians have also improved a lot. Major Guillaume, you are right. The money of the mafia does come from civilians. So, I did take money from civilians. But if I take money from civilians, I will do things. You know, in a place like Beihai, civilians are not afraid of the Navy taking money, but the Navy not taking money. Guillaume was so angry that he trembled all over when he heard Darren's words. Civilians are afraid of the Navy not taking money. What a perverted logic. Protecting civilians is the Navy's responsibility. If you take money, the nature of it changes. Darren, you bastard, where is your belief in justice? Darren smiled. You have your beliefs, I have my way of doing things. I only speak with results, and the result is that I manage the North Sea very well, better than any period in history. The situation in the North Sea is far more complicated than you think, and many things are not what you see in Marineford. Of course. He spread his hands. If you don't accept my statement, you can impeach me to the headquarters. As long as the headquarters issues an order, I am willing to accept any punishment from the headquarters. Guillaume opened his mouth. Just as he was about to say something, the flying squirrel hurried in. Colonel Darren. The flying squirrel looked extremely solemn, as if he felt the tension in the office and hesitated to speak. Darren glanced at him, waved his hand and said directly, "Tell me, what happened?" The flying squirrel nodded and said in a deep voice, "The operation of Germa 66s, killing the 4 nations has begun. The evil army has assembled more than 10,000 troops and is about to launch an attack on the kingdom of Yatis. Based on the judgment of the troops and combat power of both sides, once the kingdom of Germa launches a war, the kingdom of Yatis is estimated to be captured within an hour. Governor Tyrell of the kingdom of Yatis has sent a request for help to our North Sea Navy, hoping that our North Sea Navy will send troops to mediate." After the voice fell, the faces of Kaji and Guillaume suddenly changed. Germa 66, a powerful force known as the Evil Army, and War House, is the world's only territorial country and a member of the world government. The top of the power pyramid of the Germa kingdom is the Vinsmoke family. As officers of the headquarters, the 2 of them naturally know something about the powerful military country of the North Sea. The king of the Germa kingdom is the current head of the Vinsmoke family, Vinsmoke Judge, nicknamed Strange Bird. He is a scientist who masters advanced military science and technology. The Germa 66 he leads is one of the most powerful armies in the world and has a great reputation in the North Sea. If Vinsmoke Judge really wants to dominate the North Sea as he claims, the entire North Sea will probably be dragged into the flames of war. Thinking of this, the 2 of them trembled in their hearts and their eyes became a little flustered. They grew up in the Marine headquarters, Marineford. After all, they were too young and had never seen a war, so they were a little panicked for a while. Subconsciously, they looked at Darren. So, didn't the strange bird receive the letter we sent? Darren half squinted his eyes and said with a smile. When the flying squirrel saw Darren's expression, the familiar relationship of working together for many years made him realize instantly that Vinsmoke Judge was in trouble. It's confirmed that it has been delivered to him, he said in a deep voice. Very good. Darren laughed and extinguished his cigar directly, his eyes gradually becoming cold. Then let's go. The flying squirrel nodded, took out the military Den Mushi to call his subordinates at all levels, and acted quickly. Darren casually put on a large cloak of justice. Wait. Dion's voice came from behind, with an uneasy tone. Darren looked back at her. Dion hesitated for a moment, gritted his teeth and said, "Should we report to the headquarters first? Our navy has no right to interfere in disputes between countries. If we interfere in other countries' internal affairs rashly, it will cause political disputes if we are not careful." What a naive girl. Darren had such a thought in his mind. With the strength of Germa 66, if we have to wait for the response from the headquarters, the heads of the kings of the 4 countries in the North Sea will probably be hanging on the walls of Vinsmoke Judge by then. He sneered. Besides, I will not allow Germa 66 to start a large-scale war within my jurisdiction, causing casualties among innocent civilians. Dion was stunned when he heard this, and his eyes lit up. It seems that this guy still has some sense of responsibility. Darren's next words almost made her spit out blood in anger. Otherwise, if all the civilians are dead, who can I ask for money? Dion's chest rose and fell rapidly, staring at the tall man in front of him, and shouted angrily. Darren, you bastard, do you protect civilians just to get money? At this time, the sound of military trumpets gradually sounded in the distant naval port. That was the navy of the 321st branch gathering. Darren smiled. Of course not. Dion was startled, and his heart was inexplicably relieved. Darren smiled. In addition to this reason, isn't it, Lady Margaret is in the kingdom of Yadis. We just slept together the night before yesterday. If I don't take action, it's not justifiable. Dion. Kaji. They were stunned. You sent troops just to save your lover. Chapter 12 I will end this war. Kingdom of Yadis. Border sea area. The sky was gloomy, the sea was howling with strong winds, and huge waves were rolling. On the border, tens of thousands of soldiers of the Kingdom of Yadis held swords and spears in their hands and formed a loose battle formation. They looked at the huge ships that kept appearing on the sea in the distance with horrified eyes and pale faces, and their hands holding weapons trembled slightly uncontrollably. 1, 2, 3. One after another, the warships, like military fortresses, moved forward on the sea with strong winds and huge waves as if walking on flat ground, and sailed towards the direction of the Kingdom of Yadis with iron-blooded momentum. The flag with the word, 66, was hung above each warship. The main structure of the warship is rock and metal, made of huge snails dragged forward. The leading battleship was even larger, as big as a small town. The towering main fortress tower was hung with the high-spirited, Falcon Cross, flag. Saint-Germain. This was the main battleship of the evil army, Germa 66. Damn it, has the navy arrived yet? King Yadis III was a fat middle-aged man with a golden crown and a mustache. He was wearing luxurious clothes, and his fat squeezed wrinkles out of his noble clothes. At this moment, he looked at the Germa 66 army that was surging like a steel torrent and like a dark cloud on the sea in the distance, and his face was covered with cold sweat. That madman Vinsmoke Judge actually threatened to cut off his head and let Yadis Kingdom hand over his king. Otherwise, he would lead the evil army to raze the entire Yadis Kingdom to the ground. Looking at the obscure glances that the soldiers around him cast at him from time to time, Yadis III was as anxious as an ant on a hot pot. Your Majesty, I have informed Lord Darren that the 321st branch has already sent troops and will arrive at any time. Tyrell, the Governor-General of the Kingdom of Yadis, replied respectfully. He is a handsome man who looks to be in his early 30s, with a hint of femininity between his eyebrows, and a faint fragrance from his luxurious dress. Hearing the words of his own administrative governor, the anxious Yaddis III felt a little relieved, but his face was still full of uneasiness. The Kingdom of Germa has been established in the North Sea for 300 years. It has a powerful army that makes people terrified. It extremely advocates the use of force. Most of the people in the country are adult men, and all citizens are brave soldiers. In the face of such overwhelming military strength, although their own army has an advantage in numbers, it is estimated that it will collapse completely in less than 10 minutes if they really fight. On the Saint-Germain, a tall, burly blonde figure stood at the bow like an iron tower. He wore a metal helmet, had long golden hair like a lion's mane, and looked serious. He had a pointed black beard that pointed upward, and a small mustache on his protruding chin. He wore an orange cape, a light gray combat uniform with the 66 logo of Germa, black combat boots, and held a silver-white metal spear in his hand. Vinsmoke Judge, the head of the Vinsmoke family, the commander of Germa 66, and the current king of the Germa kingdom. What a bunch of good-for-nothings. Such a weak country can actually exist in the North Sea for so long, it's simply a shame for the North Sea. Vinsmoke Judge stared at the army on the distant coastline with a cold look in his eyes, and a sneer of defiance appeared at the corner of his mouth. Master, are we sure we want to take action? The new admiral of the North Sea and the Navy. A man in a butler's tuxedo stood respectfully behind Vinsmoke Judge and asked cautiously. Vinsmoke Judge raised his eyebrows. The butler's pupils shrank. Swish. Blood spurted up, and a sharp spear pierced his heart. Drip, drip. The bright red blood gushed out, and the light in the butler's pupils faded quickly. He looked at his master with disbelief and knelt on the ground weakly. Admiral of the North Sea. He is just a colonel of the Navy headquarters. What qualifications does he have to send a letter to warn me? Vinsmoke Judge looked at his subordinates with cold eyes. No one can stop the glory and dominance of Germa. After saying that, he pulled out his spear and swung it, splashing a line of blood on the ground. He never looked at his subordinates who slowly fell and lost their lives behind him. Germa does not need cowardly soldiers. As for the letter sent by the so-called North Sea admiral named Darren, he had already thrown it directly into the trash can. Vinsmoke Judge had such a thought in his mind and looked around. On the battleships of Germa 66, dense figures stood there. With muscular and tall stature, every soldier wore sunglasses, with a dull and indifferent expression. Even though they were about to face a war, there was no emotional fluctuation on the faces of these soldiers. Cloned soldiers. Vinsmoke Judge looked at his group of loyal subordinates and smiled with satisfaction. The cooperation with Vegapunk allowed him to obtain some bloodline factor technology. By modifying the bloodline factor of the baby, he mastered the cloning technology and used it to create cloned soldiers for Germa 66. Cloned soldiers have strong physiques and are absolutely obedient to orders. Their bloodline is also added with the concept of not fearing death and never betraying. In Vinsmoke Judge's view, this is the best and most powerful army in the world. The Navy is simply vulnerable in front of his war army that is not afraid of pain and death. The most important point is that with the current technology, it only takes 5 years to create a 20-year-old soldier. In other words, as long as there is enough money, he can copy soldiers indefinitely and create the largest army in the world. As long as he conquers the 4 countries of the North Sea including Yaddis, and then takes over the entire North Sea, with the resources of the entire North Sea, the number of his troops will be endless, even called dominating the world is no problem. Thinking of this, Vinsmoke Judge sneered and raised his hand, making a gesture. Accompanying his action, the originally scattered battleship camp quickly adjusted. Driven by the giant snail. Dozens of battleships quickly and orderly approached each other. In the terrified and shocked eyes of tens of thousands of soldiers in the kingdom of Yaddis. The dozens of battleships originally scattered in Germa 66 were combined into a behemoth floating on the sea. The towering military fortress. The huge black gun barrel. There are tens of thousands of clone soldiers holding swords and guns. From a distance. The entire Germa 66 fleet has become a war beast armed to the teeth, exuding a fierce and terrifying atmosphere. This is the Kingdom of Germa. For the glory of Germa. Dominate the North Sea. Vinsmoke Judge raised his spear with a fierce smile and shouted loudly. After the words fell, tens of thousands of clone soldiers raised their weapons in unison, and the sound shook the world. For the glory of Germa. Dominate the North Sea. The deafening roar seemed to turn into a substantial sound wave, spreading towards the army of the Kingdom of Yaddis on the coast. The overwhelming killing intent almost suffocated them, and many young soldiers even fell to the ground, and the weapons in their hands fell with a clang. Yaddis III himself was so scared that he trembled all over, and had to rely on the support of several ministers beside him to barely stand. "It's over, it's over," he murmured with a pale face. On the Saint Germain. Seeing that the army of the Kingdom of Yaddis was so miserable, Vinsmoke Judge laughed wildly. "Kneel down and surrender. Germa is the overlord of the North Sea." He raised the metal spear in his hand, and the spear emitted flickering blue electric light. With his action, the entire strict and iron-blooded military fortress of the Germa kingdom actually rushed towards the coastline at full speed. The huge scale and volume raised a surging wave several meters high on the sea. Vinsmoke Judge took a deep breath and grinned. "Everyone prepare. Attack." Before he finished speaking, a black shell suddenly fell from the sky and landed heavily beside him. Vinsmoke Judge's pupils shrank. Boom! A violent explosion suddenly rose up, and billowing flames and dark smoke spread out. The sudden change made the clone soldiers who were originally preparing to charge stagnate. On the coastline, the nobles and soldiers of the Kingdom of Yaddis were also stunned on the spot, looking at this scene with dull faces. "Damn it! Who is it?" The strong wind blew away the thick smoke, and in the light of fire, Vinsmoke Judge's dusty figure climbed out of a deep pit, gritting his teeth and roaring. As if he had noticed something, he turned his head and looked in a certain direction. At the same time, the ministers and soldiers of the Kingdom of Yaddis also looked at that position. On the sea surface with howling winds and surging waves, a huge warship slowly emerged. On the towering mast, the black word, Justice, was flying. A tall and imposing young figure stood on the bow of the warship, and the wide white cloak behind him fluttered in the wind, making a rustling sound. "It's Darren. The Navy is here. We are saved." Audis III burst into tears of joy, his face flushed with excitement. In contrast, Vinsmoke Judge's face was extremely pale. Under the gaze of tens of thousands of people from the Kingdom of Yaddis and the Kingdom of Germa. The warship sailed into the sea where the two sides were confronting each other at a steady and fast speed. It was like an insurmountable natural moat, separating the armies of the two countries from each other. Instantly, the atmosphere on the sea became dead silent and tense. Everyone involuntarily turned their eyes to the figure on the bow of the warship. Black short hair, sword eyebrows and starry eyes, deep and cold features. The corners of the Navy captain's mouth gradually curled up with a smile. Raising his head, with a defiant look, looking at Vinsmoke Judge, whose face was extremely ugly in the distance. "In the name of justice." His voice echoed on the empty sea. "I'm here to end this war." Chapter 13. Magnetic fruit famous scene. "I'm here to end this war." The deep voice of the Navy captain gradually echoed on the Dead Sea, making everyone's eyes widen. On the deck of the warship, the Navy of the North Sea looked at the domineering admiral on the bow, and their eyes were full of admiration. Many young female Navy officers' eyes turned into hearts. "Damn it! He's pretending again. Why can't I think of such a line?" Kaji glanced at the reactions of others, and cursed in a low voice after realizing it, his face flushed. Dion's eyes flickered slightly. At this time, the furious voice of Vinsmoke Judge came from the Germa kingdom. "Darren, what are you doing? Do you want to attack me?" Germa is a member of the world government, and a powerful country that is qualified to attend the World Conference. If you attack me, you are provoking the member states. And your navy has no right to interfere in disputes between countries. Darren narrowed his eyes, and the cloak of justice behind him fluttered in the wind, sneering. Vinsmoke Judge. It is true that the Kingdom of Germa is a member of the government, but the Kingdom of Yaddis is also a member of the member states. The most important thing is that I will not tolerate such a serious war under my jurisdiction." Vinsmoke Judge laughed angrily. "So you think you, a mere naval colonel with a warship and a few hundred people, can stop the army of Germa 66? Naive Navy kid, stop talking nonsense here." He raised his hand heavily. "No one can stop my ambition to dominate the North Sea." A flash of madness and brutality flashed in his eyes. "Open fire. Sink that warship." As a member of the Germa world government, even if he kills this so-called shitty North Sea admiral on the spot, he will not be blamed by the world government. And this can also send a signal and a warning to the Navy headquarters. Even their navy must not hinder Germa's path to dominance. Tremble under the fire of Germa. Surrender. As soon as the words fell, boom 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 boom. The deafening sound of artillery fire broke the silence on the sea. Everyone in the kingdom of Yatis was horrified to see that on the Germa warship, countless flames bloomed and swallowed wildly. As streaks of fiery red light leapt up into the sky, they only felt that the ever-changing sky suddenly became gray, as if covered by a thick layer of dark clouds. No. That was not a dark cloud. It was almost countless shells and bullets, densely cutting the air like locusts, rubbing out sharp explosions, drawing dense parabolas in the sky, and covering the area where the warship was. A large dark area formed a terrifying and oppressive death net. There was no escape. Instantly, a hot wind blew from the sky above their heads, and hundreds of shells seemed to be pouring down at this moment, even making the sea surface filled with a strong smell of gunpowder. It was even vaguely visible that the shape of the shells was not a regular sphere, but similar to rocket launchers and missiles. This is the powerful military technology of Germa 66 that is enough to dominate the North Sea. On the warship, Kaji and Gion's faces changed drastically. Damn it! Germa 66 actually dared to attack the Navy. Is Vinsmoke Judge crazy? Kaji was extremely anxious, with a layer of fine beads of sweat oozing from his forehead. Gion suddenly drew out the famous sword at his waist, but his face was extremely solemn. This scale of intensive bombardment was enough to easily raise a small mountain range to the ground in an instant, and they had no way of intercepting it. The most important thing was that they were now in the middle of the sea. Once the warship under their feet was sunk, even if they survived this terrible bombardment, they would not be able to resist the second round of bombardment when they fell into the sea. However, just when the two of them were extremely anxious, they were suddenly surprised to find that the other navy on the warship had a very strange expression on their faces. Could it be? Gion and Kaji suddenly reacted and turned to look at Darren on the bow of the warship. At this time, the highest military commander of the North Sea Navy moved. He raised a sneer at the corner of his mouth, looked up at the rain of shells falling all over the sky, and slowly raised his hand. Push gently in the air. It felt like he was gently pushing the air. Then, a faint purple arc suddenly flashed in the air. The invisible force field spread silently. Kaji and Gion were stunned, their eyes gradually widened, as if they saw something incredible. On the coastline, tens of thousands of soldiers of the Kingdom of Yatis, including the king, were dumbfounded, their eyes almost popped out of their eyeballs. I saw the dense fire net pouring down like locusts. Countless shells and bullets. It seemed that they suddenly hit an invisible film. The speed of falling suddenly dropped sharply. Finally, they solidified in the air strangely. The dense shells. Silently suspended in the air 5 meters above the warship, motionless. At such a close distance, even Cake and Gion could clearly see the pattern on the shells and smell the pungent smell of gunpowder. Silence. The world suddenly fell into a deathly silence. The extreme silence even gave everyone an illusion. In the world in front of him, all the air seemed to be vibrating. On the main battleship of Germa, Vinsmoke Judge looked at this strange scene with his eyes wide open, and he couldn't believe his eyes. The whistling and falling shells actually stopped in midair. The whole world seemed to stop at this moment. In the heart-pounding silence. Suddenly a slight sound was heard. Click-snap. The lighter lit up. On the bow of the warship. The black-haired Navy captain was blocking the cold sea breeze with one hand and holding a lighter with the other hand, lighting a cigar. A brighter dim red light lit up. "I'll give you one last chance, Vinsmoke Judge," he said in a very calm tone. As he spoke, the countless shells suspended in the air slowly turned under the traction of some invisible force, as if the cannon was adjusting its angle. The rocket launchers that were spewing flames also turned in direction. The target was aimed at the direction of the Jerma kingdom. Vinsmoke Judge's face changed drastically. Looking at the countless rocket launchers and missiles that had turned in different directions, a piercing chill immediately emerged from his back. The North Sea Admiral took a deep puff of his cigar, and the smoke he exhaled condensed into a snow-white flag in the air. "Go back, I can pretend nothing happened." Chapter 14. One man destroys a country. What kind of ability is this? Kaji stared at the cannonballs slowly turning in the sky above his head with a dull face, and even his words became stuttering. The ability to control metal. Guillaume was also stunned. The flying squirrel next to him crossed his arms and lit a cigarette with a smile. Darren's ability to control magnetic fields is getting more and more accurate. And in the distance, on the Saint-Germain, Vinsmoke Judge looked at this oppressive scene with trembling pupils, and first couldn't help but grit his teeth. However, the words Darren said directly ignited his inner anger again. This Navy kid, what a big tone. Does he really think that with the power of a devil fruit, he can fight against the evil army of the Jerma kingdom? Don't joke. If I can't even deal with a brat like you, how can Jerma 66 dominate the North Sea? Vinsmoke Judge roared with red eyes. Everyone attack. Come over to me. Crash the warship. As soon as the voice fell, the Jerma fleet rioted again. Under the drag of the giant snail, it was fully powered and madly accelerated towards the warship where Darren was. Darren didn't say anything. He raised his hand slowly again. His movements were so slow that compared with the dozens of warships of Jerma 66 roaring on the sea and charging with surging waves, it seemed extremely awkward. Even tens of thousands of people in the kingdom of Yatis on the coastline could clearly see his movements. The 5 slender and powerful fingers stretched gently in the air. Then, clenched fists. The next second, buzz buzz buzz. A violent and sharp sonic boom sounded suddenly. Everyone's eyes widened. The dense shells in the air that seemed to cover the sky suddenly trembled violently. An invisible storm seemed to emerge in the void. Then the explosion of the air roared. The rain of shells suspended in the air. The death net that was enough to easily raise half a mountain to the ground. Actually accompanied by the Admiral's action, rushed towards the battleships of Jerma 66 at a speed twice as fast as the previous fall. Vinsmoke Judge's eyes were instantly filled with bloodshot. Boom! The shells like a torrential rain fell madly into the war fortress built by dozens of battleships. The earth-shaking huge explosions bloomed all over the land of the Jerma kingdom, and fiery red mushroom clouds continued to bloom. Under such a fierce bombardment, the clone soldiers had no time to react. They could only watch their cutting-edge technological weapons explode beside them, and then be ruthlessly swallowed and drowned by the flames and shock waves. The raging flames shot up into the sky, and the Jerma kingdom, like an island, trembled under the bombardment. The vast explosion stirred up horizontal air waves, which spread out in circles towards the sea in all directions, causing waves of storms. The thick black smoke rolled up into the sky, and the vibrations and wind and waves from afar made the soldiers of the Yatis kingdom on the coastline pale. On the warship that was shaking due to the storm, all the navy, including Guillaume and Cake, held onto the masts and other fixed objects tightly to avoid being thrown out. Guillaume and the other person couldn't help but look at the figure on the bow that stood still in the storm like a reef. In the background of the sky-high explosion of the Jerma kingdom in the distance, the North Sea Admiral smoked a cigar, with his usual calm smile on his lips. The wide white cloak behind him was as dazzling as blood under the light of the fire. In a trance, they finally realized that the reason why Darren was able to manage the extremely chaotic North Sea so well and in an orderly manner was not only because of his strong and sophisticated political skills. The most important thing was his monster-like strength. Enough to easily destroy a country by one person. The continuous explosions lasted for a full minute before slowly ending. When the cold sea breeze blew away the thick smoke, and everyone saw the tragic situation of the Germa kingdom, which was composed of dozens of warships, and they all gasped. The ground was scorched, with embers of fire burning everywhere, as well as deep and shallow pits. The towering and solemn artillery platforms and fortresses had collapsed and turned into charred ruins. The bodies of clone soldiers were scattered all over the ruins, many of which had been blown to pieces, leaving only blurred limbs and arms. On the main battleship Saint-Germain, the Cross Falcon flag hanging at the highest point gradually turned into ashes in the flames. Most of the Germa kingdom was razed to the ground. Cough, cough, cough. At this time, a violent cough suddenly sounded in the ruins somewhere. Damn Navy kid, how dare you! As the charred rock walls and rocks fell, Vinsmoke Judge stood up from the ruins with difficulty. At this time, he no longer had the arrogance he had at the beginning. His body was covered with blood and he looked extremely embarrassed. The cloak with the 66 logo on it spread from his body like a living thing. It seems that you have developed the first generation of combat suits. Darren raised his eyebrows and murmured with interest. The combat suit of Germa 66 is a high-tech product made by Vinsmoke Judge. This powerful combat suit is made of special shape memory armor and is very strong. Its cloak acts as a shield, and even flames cannot burn it. Its defensive function of the cloak helped him block the impact of the explosion. In that case, let me try the power of this combat suit. Darren murmured softly, with a gleam in his eyes. He turned his head and said to the Navy. Hold on. Guillaume and Kaji were stunned. But before they could react, they saw that the other Navy, including the Flying Squirrel, were holding the railings on the hull tightly. Without time to think, they also followed suit and held the fixed objects on the warship. Then, Darren took a deep breath. Hiss. With his breath, the cigar in his mouth burned a lot. The captain stared at the Saint-Germain 100 meters away with a disdainful look. Bent his knees slightly. The body sank. The cloak behind him fluttered. The muscles of his body were tense, compressed like a spring. The posture was like a cheetah ready to go. Hey, hey, hey. Could it be? Kaji seemed to have guessed something, and his eyes twitched. As if to confirm his thoughts. Darren, who was tense and sinking, raised his mouth. The body compressed to the extreme like a spring suddenly exerted force. Boom. A dull roar came from the hull of the warship. Kaji and Guillaume felt that the world in front of them seemed to have suddenly turned upside down. The terrifying centrifugal force surged out, and their bodies were almost thrown up. The entire huge warship was tilted by Darren's kick. The bow of the ship sank forward into the sea, the tail of the warship was raised high, and the tilt angle of the deck reached almost 45 degrees. Bang! Darren's feet burst out with unparalleled power, and the tilted huge warship moved sideways for several meters. With the help of this recoil force, Darren's figure also shot out from the bow like a sharp arrow, and broke through the sound barrier in an instant, blasting the air with a sharp explosion. His figure whistled parallel to the sea surface, and the speed was so fast. The airwaves carried by him even plowed a long white wave groove on the sea surface. Chapter 15 Germa's Technology. What a freak. Looking at the figure that shot out like a white arrow towards the Saint-Germain, Guillaume, who was holding the railing of the warship tightly with both hands, looked like he had seen a ghost. Boom. At this time, the high-raised tail of the warship fell into the sea again under the action of gravity, and the waves washed down, soaking the Navy on the warship. Kaji didn't care about these at all, staring at Darren's figure in amazement, his eyes almost popped out of his eye sockets. This exaggerated explosive power. That bastard actually wanted to rely on his own strength to directly cross a distance of nearly 100 meters and kill into the Germa kingdom. Hey, does that bastard always like to act like this? Kaji looked at the flying squirrel not far away with a twitching mouth, and couldn't help asking. A helpless bitter smile appeared on the flying squirrel's face. This is Darren's fighting style. In the past year alone, he has used various methods to destroy more than 5 warships. If it weren't for the strong financial resources of the North Sea Navy, the North Sea Fleet would have gone bankrupt long ago with just a little military funds allocated by the headquarters. The flying squirrel couldn't help but complain in his heart. It happened so fast. The warships on this side regained stability on the sea surface again, and Darren on the other side had already sunk heavily into the land of the Jerma kingdom with an overwhelming momentum, like a horizontally fired cannonball. Boom! A deafening roar sounded, a lot of dust flew, and the whole ground seemed to shake slightly. The next second, Darren, biting a cigar in his mouth, slowly stood up from a pit with a diameter of 5 meters, with a sly grin on the corner of his mouth. Smooth landing. He smiled as he spoke, the cloak behind him danced wildly in the vast dust and wind. Kill. Kill him for me. When Vinsmoke Judge saw the cruel admiral, his pupils shrank slightly, and then he gave orders with a ferocious expression. As soon as the voice fell, countless clone soldiers rushed out from the ruins of the surrounding artillery and fortress. The clone soldiers wearing uniforms and sunglasses moved in unison, exuding a cold breath, as if there were no human emotions. Swish! They all raised their long guns, and hundreds of guns were aimed at the Navy colonel. Pull the trigger. Bang 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 bang. A large piece of fire was swallowed and spit out from the muzzle, and countless bullets whizzed out from the muzzle, leaving traces in the void. Haven't you learned your lesson yet? Darren grinned, a hint of madness flashing in his eyes. Without using the ability of the magnet fruit, he just walked forward leisurely in the face of the dense rain of bullets. Vinsmoke Judge's eyes suddenly widened, as if he had seen something incredible. Ding ding dang dang. Dense bullets fell on Darren's body one after another, smashing and exploding his suit and military uniform, but it seemed as if they hit steel, making a crisp sound. Sparks flew up, and bullets bounced off the Navy colonel's body like raindrops hitting the earth, leaving fine craters on the surrounding ground, fortresses and building walls. From a distance, the Navy colonel looked like a traveler walking in the face of a storm. So tough. How is this possible? How can a human have such a physique? Vinsmoke Judge roared with his eyes wide open. Seeing that the shooting was ineffective, a clone soldier took out a small rocket launcher from the military fortress, carried it on his shoulder, aimed, and pulled the trigger. Bew! The palm-sized small rocket launcher made a sharp explosion, dragging a long red tail flame towards Darren. But the latter suddenly raised his hand and grabbed it. Brand new technology. This is much better than the Navy's artillery shells. Darren looked at the trembling rocket launcher in his hand with interest, said something casually, and then threw it heavily. Bew! The rocket launcher returned to the original path and exploded in front of the clone soldier holding the rocket launcher barrel. The raging flames instantly engulfed the area within a diameter of 5 meters. The power is comparable to that of a small heavy artillery, but it is more portable. Darren squinted his eyes to observe the power of the rocket launcher and gave an intuitive evaluation. He already had an idea in his mind. He took so much trouble to harvest wealth from the Mafia and to support the North Sea Navy with military expenditures that were several times higher than the headquarters. Of course, his goal was very clear. He wanted to turn the North Sea Navy into his own private land. The entire North Sea fleet would become his personal armed force. As a time traveler, he knew very well that he was the biggest constraint of the Navy. That is, no matter how he tried to whitewash it, the justice of the Navy would always be the power of the world government. This is a realistic problem that cannot be ignored. The Navy, the world's largest violent law enforcement agency, is an institution under the world government and the face of the government. And the most critical point in this is military expenditure. The world government collects sky gold from the major member states of the world, and then directly or indirectly controls the financial lifeline of the Navy by allocating military expenditures. The Navy, which does not have independent financial power and lacks additional channels to obtain military expenditures, can only be restricted everywhere and finally have to bow its head in reality. The ultimate goal of Darren's wealth accumulation is to control an independent military force that can be used by himself and is not restricted by the government. At least for now, after several years of hard work and planning, the military expenditure of the North Sea Navy has completely met the self-sufficiency, and even the military expenditure standard is far higher than the same level of the headquarters. But this is not enough. Darren is deeply aware of the weakness of the Four Seas Navy, which is far inferior to the elite of the headquarters in terms of combat power. Compared with the level of manpower domineering in the New World, it is still a long way off. Although he has greatly improved the overall strength of the North Sea Navy through various means such as strengthening training and scientifically implementing training methods. But this is still far from enough. However, back to reality, improving the combat effectiveness of the army cannot be achieved overnight. But the Germa 66 in front of him opened up a new idea for him. Germa 66 controls one of the most advanced and cutting-edge military technologies in the world. Whether it is various new weapons, cyborg technology or even combat uniforms, it can quickly improve the combat effectiveness of the North Sea Navy. If he could obtain the technology of Germa 66 and equip his North Sea Navy with it, Darren believes that he will have an extremely powerful North Sea fleet in a short time. In this case, Darren's mouth cracked into an arc, and his figure suddenly quickened his pace. The target, the commander of Germa 66, Vinsmoke Judge. The data is very important during the new book period. Please support me in every way, please follow me. I am grateful for reading. Chapter 16 I am the genius of our department, Kaji. As Darren began to charge, he strode forward with great strides. The ground where he landed shook violently, and a hole was blown up, as if he was hit by an invisible giant hammer and sank directly, and the soil flew everywhere. Under the explosion of this inhuman power, Darren's whole body was like a whistling cannonball, wrapped in a violent hurricane, and rushed out in the blink of an eye. In an instant, Vinsmoke Judge only felt a suffocating sense of oppression coming at him, and a piercing chill was born in his spine, as if he was stared at by a sea king-like giant beast. The murderous intent emanating from the naval colonel was like a demon that had come out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, as if the sea breeze blowing in was filled with the smell of iron and blood. Kill him for me. Recalling the cruel methods used by the Navy to suppress pirates, Vinsmoke Judge's eyes were bloodshot and he shouted. As soon as he finished speaking, dozens of clone soldiers rushed towards Darren with their weapons. Two shining long swords slashed down in front of him. Darren raised his mouth and slightly turned his body. The sharp blades just brushed past his body. At the moment of passing by, the Navy colonel's hands were like spears cast in steel, turning his palms into swords, and pierced the throats of the two clone soldiers at an extremely sharp speed. Swish! The bright red blood spurted up, and the clone soldiers' pupils quickly became dim. Without stopping for a moment, after easily dealing with the two people in front of him, Darren rushed out again like a tiger out of a cage. With a physical defense comparable to that of an iron block, he brazenly crashed into the camp of clone soldiers, like a tiger entering a flock of sheep, unstoppable. From a distance, the dense army of clone soldiers surrounded the Navy colonel tightly, and the sound of flesh being torn and bones being broken was constantly heard from the center of the encirclement. The warm bodies of clone soldiers flew out of the crowd and fell down with blood splashing. In just 10 seconds, the ground was dyed red with blood, and the fragments of corpses were everywhere. Guion and Kaji on the warship watched this scene from a distance with shock on their faces. At this moment, Darren seemed to have turned into an efficient and precise killing machine. Wherever he passed, those clone soldiers whose physiques were several times better than ordinary people could not hold on for a moment under his abnormal physique and fierce close combat, and they would die if they were touched. Destroying withering and rotten wood, every part of Darren's body became a killing weapon, harvesting lives at an alarming speed, like a gust of wind sweeping fallen leaves. Bullets, steel knives, battle axes, long swords, all kinds of weapons fell on him, but it was as if they were cut on steel, sparks splashed, and only a shallow red mark was left. The blood-soaked Navy colonel laughed wantonly, and the snow-white cloak of justice behind him was dyed blood red. That guy is enjoying the fun of fighting. Guion stared at the Navy colonel with a wanton grin on his face, and his mind couldn't help but recall the scene on the training ground yesterday. Facing his iron-cutting swordsmanship, Darren chose to resist. Now it seems that he is not conceited about the defense of his body, but is enjoying the feeling of life and death hanging on a line and indulging in fighting. This is really a lunatic. Guillaume bit his teeth and couldn't help cursing secretly. Kaji, who was standing next to him, glanced at Guillaume and saw her staring at Darren's back in a daze. Suddenly, as if realizing something, he turned his head and shouted hurriedly at the flying squirrel. "Hurry up, we have to go too. I'm going to beat Vinsmoke Judge away." The flying squirrel was stunned, wondering why Kaji, the lazy pighead, suddenly became so active, and said subconsciously, "Are you sure? Colonel Darren doesn't like us to interfere in his battle. He is enjoying it now. And according to our intelligence, Vinsmoke Judge, the commander of Germa 66, is very powerful. The high-tech weapons he developed." Before he finished speaking, the collar of his military uniform was grabbed by Kaji. The latter's face flushed, and he said viciously, "Damn flying squirrel, who do you think I am? I am the genius of the headquarters, Kaji. How can a mere Germa 66 be my opponent?" He let go of his hand, turned around suddenly, his small eyes turned, glanced at Guillaume with the corner of his eyes, looked in the direction of Germa 66 with a righteous voice, and chuckled in a low voice. "This feeling of boiling blood is really long lost. I didn't expect that in the mere North Sea, there would be someone who could bring such pressure to this genius." Looking at Kaji's cool figure, the corner of the flying squirrel's mouth twitched. He waved his hand helplessly and made a military gesture. The Navy immediately took action, the warships' engines were fully powered, and they accelerated towards the battleships of the Germa kingdom. And on the other side. Clang! A crisp sound rang out, like the clash of metal. Several steel knives slashed heavily on Darren's chest, sparks flew, and they broke with a sound. The clone soldiers in front of him looked at the steel knives that were broken into two pieces in their hands, and a flash of surprise flashed in their eyes. Although they were deprived of their sense of pain by Vinsmoke Judge, they were not afraid of death and would not betray, but their basic emotions still existed. But they were fundamentally I couldn't understand why the body of this man in front of me was harder than the weapons they made with fine steel. And it was obvious that compared to the beginning, the body defense of this navy became stronger. Almost. Real combat is indeed the best way to improve strength. Darren suddenly laughed. In his insight, talent perception, after the previous round of fighting, his physique and strength have been greatly improved, especially the physique, which has exceeded the 60-point mark. It's time to get down to business. After the physique was increased to 60 points, facing the attack of the clone soldiers, there was no obvious improvement effect. And these guys were deprived of fear, and they were tireless and not afraid of death. It would only be a waste of time to continue fighting with them. Thinking of this, Darren licked his chapped lips. A sharp whistle sounded from behind. Several clone soldiers jumped high and chopped down Darren's neck with steel knives in their hands. But the next second, they were shocked to find that the long sword they swung suddenly stopped moving when it was still a palm away from Darren's back of the head. Buzz buzz buzz. The extremely suppressed silence enveloped the surroundings. The long sword hovering in the air kept trembling and buzzing. Then, no one saw the naval colonel make any movements. The ground under their feet suddenly moved. Strips of steel bars were lifted from the ground like black giant pythons, intertwined like living things, and turned into a dense black net, covering the clone soldiers. They didn't even have time to react, their bodies were completely bound by the intertwined and twisted steel bars, and then they were torn off alive. The steel bars imprisoned their bodies, and both ends were deeply inserted into the dilapidated ground, getting tighter and tighter. Under Vinsmoke Judge's horrified and almost frozen gaze. Hundreds of clone soldiers within 100 meters with Darren's position as the center were all bound by steel bars, growing from the ground and tightened continuously. Blood gushed out, and the rusty steel bars cut their skin and flesh alive. In just a few seconds, the scarlet blood flowed all over the ground, their bodies were pierced and strangled by the entangled and twisted steel bars, and various organs flowed all over the ground. The entire battlefield suddenly became quiet. The highest commander of the North Sea Navy stood in a blood-red ruin of corpses. Countless steel bars around him danced wildly like black snakes. Like a devil walking out of hell. Chapter 17 I am the king of the North Sea. Dust rolled. The cold steel danced wildly. Vinsmoke Judge looked at the Jerma kingdom, which had mostly turned into ruins, with his eyes wide open. Damn it! I am the man who will lead Jerma to dominate the North Sea. Darren narrowed his eyes and smiled. The Navy is the overlord of this sea. As for the title of King of the North Sea, I will not give it to you. He raised his hand and waved it forward. Dozens of twisted steel bars suddenly rioted, stretched and stretched, pierced the air under the effect of the magnetic field, and whistled towards Vinsmoke Judge. Swish! 2 streams of white smoke suddenly spurted out from the heels of Vinsmoke Judge's combat boots. Driven by the thrusters, his figure soared from the spot like a strange bird. Then let you see the true power of Jerma 66 with your own eyes. Darren. He waved the metal spear with both hands, constantly knocking away all the steel bars that were piercing through him, and the whole person dived down rapidly from the sky, with long golden hair fluttering behind him. Zzz. The shining blue electric light bloomed on the spear, shining with dazzling light. Electromagnetic stab. In a blink of an eye, Vinsmoke Judge had swooped in front of Darren, holding the electric spear with both hands and stabbed it down. The high-temperature current and penetrating power even made the air explode with a bang. The power of technology. Facing the electric spear that was enough to penetrate steel and fortresses, Darren just chuckled. The strong wind blowing in his face disturbed the ends of his black hair. Seeing that the tip of the spear was getting closer and closer to his eyebrows, he could even feel the scorching temperature of the current, but he still kept smiling. An invisible magnetic field wave suddenly spread out from his body. The next second, ripples seemed to be rippling in the air. The exploding spear seemed to pierce into a ball of transparent paste, and the speed of penetration slowed down at an astonishing speed, and finally stagnated. Vinsmoke Judge's pupils shrank. No matter how hard he drove the spear, the high-tech weapon in his hand remained motionless, as if it was tightly grasped by a big hand. Using the power of technology to deal with me, this is your greatest stupidity. Darren said lightly. Damn it, I don't believe it. Vinsmoke Judge roared hysterically, and simply gave up the spear in his hand. His body spun in the air, and his combat boots burst out with dazzling lightning, heading horizontally towards Darren's head shot over heavily. Electromagnetic blast. However, the same scene was repeated. The combat boots that continuously ejected white-eye air waves were also frozen, and confined, in mid-air by that strange force, and could no longer move. Vinsmoke Judge's expression flashed with horror. His high-tech weapons were completely restrained by this guy's devil fruit ability. Before he could react, Vinsmoke Judge only felt a flash in front of his eyes, and the naval colonel in front of him had disappeared. What a fast speed! The bursting wind exploded beside him, and Vinsmoke Judge gritted his teeth, and a chill came out of his spine. Behind him, the fluttering cloak suddenly squirmed like a living thing, wrapping his body. Boom! A military boot shot into his abdomen with great force. Under the tremendous power, the commander of Jerma 66 flew out like a cannonball and shot towards a military fortress in the distance. Boom! The entire castle was penetrated in an instant, and dense cracks spread on the walls, and then collapsed. Countless rocks fell, and the earth wailed under the heavy burden. Darren landed steadily. Damn it, this is impossible. My technology is obviously invincible. Watching Vinsmoke Judge stumble out of the ruins, Darren's mouth curled up with a satisfied smile. He was testing the power of this battle suit. Vinsmoke Judge was different from his future children. His body had not been genetically modified by technology, and he did not have the kind of monster body that was invulnerable to swords and guns. Most of his strength came from his high-tech weapon, the battle suit. Without the battle suit, his strength would not exceed that of a naval officer. Although this is only the first generation of combat suits, and its power is far inferior to that in the Cake Island plot, it is also objective enough. Now it seems that, at least from the attack of Vinsmoke Judge just now and the degree of defense of the cloak, Darren is very satisfied with the power of this first generation of combat suits. At least within his estimation, any professionally trained navy, if equipped with similar combat suits, will probably gain combat power not inferior to that of a Commodore. And at this moment, ha 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 ha, Let me help you, Darren. The genius Kaji from the Navy headquarters. Will defeat the evil army commander in this battle, rescue the kingdom of Yatis from the flames of war, and become a hero of the Navy." A wild laugh came from not far away. Darren was stunned and looked back. He saw that his warship had docked at some point, and Guion and Flying Squirrel were leading the Navy to engage in a fierce battle with the remnants of the clone soldiers. Kaji rushed out of the crowd with great momentum, raising a cloud of dust all the way, and rushed towards Vinsmoke Judge with unstoppable force. A few black lines floated on Darren's forehead. This guy wants to show off again. He subconsciously wanted to speak, but Kaji laughed proudly. "Darren, don't do it." Darren thought about it and stopped. Kaki was ecstatic when he saw this. Looking at the panting Vinsmoke Judge, he couldn't help but curl up a smug smile at the corner of his mouth. From the fight just now, he had seen that this guy's strength was not strong. As long as he knocked him down, Guion would definitely look at him differently. Even if he couldn't, he could become a hero who saved the kingdom of Yatis. How many ladies and young ladies would be waiting for me to care for them? Thinking of this, Kaji's pace of charge became faster and faster. Vinsmoke Judge, the commander of the evil army, Major Kaji of the Navy headquarters, in the name of justice. He didn't finish his words. Boom! A combat boot wrapped in blue electric light stepped on his face squarely. Then, it flew back at twice the speed of the original charge and knocked down a military fortress. Not far away, the Flying Squirrel covered his face with his hands in pain. Vinsmoke Judge was defeated so thoroughly, it was not because he was weak, but because Darren was too strong. Guion shook his head speechlessly. After kicking away this stupid marine who came out of nowhere, Vinsmoke Judge turned his head breathlessly and stared at Darren. "Damn it. One after another, you marines are too annoying." Boom. The combat boots under his feet once again spurted out high-heat airflow, and the figure soared up again and dived towards Darren. He was unwilling to admit that the technology he had painstakingly developed from Vegapunk had failed so thoroughly. However, facing his attack, Darren simply raised his hand and clenched it lightly. The invisible magnetic field spread and acted. Vinsmoke Judge's figure paused in midair. The next moment, intense pain came from his hands and feet. Swish! The sound of flesh being pierced was heard. The metal spear in his hand. And the combat boots on his feet. The metal components carried by them moved and pierced out like living things, piercing his hands and feet, and bleeding. "Ah, Darren, you bastard boy. That's Germa, a member of the world government, and you almost destroyed it." The furious roar came from the military Den Mushi placed on the coffee table, which vividly simulated the appearance of Admiral Sengoku of the Navy headquarters, who was furious and fuming. "Do you know that the Germa Kingdom is not an ordinary member of the member states, it is one of the member states that are qualified to participate in the World Conference. Do you know how much political pressure you will cause by doing this? It is the duty and responsibility of the Navy to protect members of the member states." Darren sat on the soft leather sofa, holding a glass of iced whiskey in one hand and a lit cigar in his hand. He crossed his legs and smoked, listening to Sengoku's scolding carelessly. Guion, Flying Squirrel and Kaji, whose face was swollen like a pig's head, stood there without daring to breathe, watching their eyes and noses. "Damn it. Darren, you bastard, did you hear what I said?" After 2 minutes of continuous rants, Zongguo saw that Darren had no intention of answering, and he became even more furious. "You, the Admiral of the North Sea, don't you want to do this?" Darren smiled and said. "Then I'll leave." Zongguo. On the other side of the Den Mushi, the Admiral's office. Zongguo suddenly lost his temper, his old face flushed red. The situation in the North Sea is extremely chaotic, and he has not forgotten the lessons of the two bastards Borsellino and Sakaski serving in the North Sea. Only Darren, the cunning kid, can govern the North Sea obediently. If he leaves office, without his suppression, I'm afraid that the North Sea will soon become the backyard of pirates and mafia families again. Just kidding. Darren's smile became more intense. He took a sip of whiskey, felt the spicy and strong liquor flowing through his throat, and said lightly. "General Zongguo, don't be so nervous, I will handle this matter." Hearing the Beihai admiral's nonchalant attitude, Zhongguo almost jumped up again, and his eyes couldn't stop twitching. He took a deep breath and forced himself to suppress the urge to rush to Beihai and beat up Darren immediately. "Darren, what are you thinking about? If this matter is not handled properly, it will cause a series of reactions," Zhongguo said in a low and solemn voice. Since the establishment of the Kingdom of Germa, it has been a member of the world government for 300 years. The Navy attacked the member of the member country. If this matter gets out of hand, even I can't protect you. Darren exhaled a puff of smoke and smiled. "Of course I understand, General Zhongguo. But this time, everything happened for a reason. Vinsmoke Judge led Germa 66 to attack the Kingdom of Yaddis, which is also one of the member countries of the government. If I hadn't stopped this war, I'm afraid the Kingdom of Yaddis would have been plunged into war and blood." Zhongguo's mouth twitched. "Are you trying to stop this war? You almost slaughtered the entire army of the Kingdom of Germa." Darren continued. "As for the chaotic situation in the North Sea, I believe that with the wisdom of the warring states generals, they must be able to see through it clearly. Countries are constantly at war, and this incident just sends a signal to many countries in the North Sea, and it is also a warning. As for the casualties of the Germa Kingdom, the army of Germa 66 is basically cloned soldiers. This product of cloning technology is essentially a weapon, and naturally it is not a civilian. Given Vinsmoke Judge's ambition and rebelliousness, after careful consideration, I think this is the only way, only then can we teach him a deep lesson. If we don't use overwhelming force to subdue him, given his character, he will only become more arrogant, rampant, and unscrupulous. By then, it will probably be more than just the Kingdom of Yaddis that will be dragged into the quagmire of war. It is hard to imagine how many innocent civilians will be deprived of their lives by the flames of war, and how many happy families will be shattered because of Germa's ambitions." Hearing the righteous words of the naval captain, Gion and Kaji, who were standing next to him, both rolled their eyes. "You don't care about the casualties of civilians, you are only worried that the outbreak of war will lead to you having no money to make." Warring in the other side of the Den Mushi, Sengoku was also silent at this time. Of course, he knew something about Vinsmoke Judge, the ambitious Germa commander. Indeed, as Darren said, the Kingdom of Yaddis was only the first step for Vinsmoke Judge. After all, the latter's ambition and goal was to dominate the entire North Sea. "So Darren, what are you going to do?" Guo hesitated for a moment, and the anger in his voice dissipated a lot. Although he was very dissatisfied with Darren's action, since the incident had already happened, it would be useless to pursue the responsibility. Darren's talents, merits, all proved that he was an indispensable pillar of the Navy in the future. And according to Sengoku's understanding of Darren, this cunning and shrewd kid would never get into trouble. No matter how sensitive the political incident was, he could solve it perfectly in an unexpected way. "You don't have to worry too much about this, General Sengoku." Darren flicked the ash and smiled with interest. "I will handle everything and give Vinsmoke Judge an offer that he can't refuse. He will not protest to the world government, the Kingdom of Germa will still remain a member of the Allied powers, the Navy will not be implicated or affected in any way, and the North Sea will still maintain peace and stability." Darren leaned forward slightly, smiling fiercely. Under the management of our Navy." The side hall suddenly became quiet, with only Darren's strong and domineering voice echoing faintly. 3 seconds later. "Then I'll leave it to you, Darren. No matter what, this matter must be handled well." Zhongguo's low voice came from the Den Mushi. Darren smiled with satisfaction. "Guarantee to complete the task, General Senguo." Blue. The communication with the Den Mushi was interrupted. Darren turned his head to look at the flying squirrel. "How is the handling of the Germa side?" The flying squirrel said in a deep voice. 10 warships and more than 5,000 troops have been drawn from other branches in the North Sea. Basically, the situation in the entire Germa kingdom has been controlled. Their fleet has left the waters of the Kingdom of Yaddis under our escort. As for Vinsmoke Judge himself, he has been detained on our warship as you wish." Darren nodded. After years of cooperation and working together, he has great confidence in the ability of the flying squirrel to do things. "Vinsmoke Judge, how are you going to deal with it? No matter what, he is the ruler of a country." At this time, Guillaume, who had been silent, finally couldn't help but speak. Darren glanced at her and suddenly smiled. There is no need for Major Guillaume to worry too much about this. Now we have more important things. What is it? Guillaume was stunned. Darren clapped his hands and smiled. Celebrate our victory. Chapter 19. The Navy does not charge money, and the people are not satisfied. As Darren clapped his hands, the door of the gorgeously decorated side hall was suddenly pushed open. The soldiers of the Kingdom of Yaddis, wearing standard military uniforms, carried large wooden boxes in one after another. In less than a minute, dozens of large wooden boxes were piled on the marble floor of the side hall, looking like a small mountain. Darren, could this be? Guillaume looked at the obviously heavy wooden box, and suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. At this time, a man dressed as a butler walked in, with a flattering smile on his face, nodding and bowing. Admiral Darren, I am the Minister of Finance of the Kingdom of Yaddis. He pointed to the big wooden box on the ground. This is a small gift from our Kingdom of Yaddis. Please don't refuse it, the North Sea Navy fleet with justice on its shoulders. As he said this, he asked his soldiers to open the wooden box. In an instant, Guillaume and Kaji opened their eyes wide, and their mouths opened into an O shape. The dazzling and bright light emanated from the opened wooden boxes, illuminating the entire side hall of the palace with colorful lights. Hualala! A dazzling array of gold and silver treasures, large stacks of colorful banknotes, various rare treasures, fine cigars, high-end wines, poured out from the fully loaded wooden boxes like flowing mercury, filling the entire side hall with the smell of money and corruption. This. Kaji stared at the pile of gold and silver treasures in front of him with his eyes wide open, and his speech became stuttering, and his swollen pig head looked extremely funny. How much wealth is this? He couldn't count it at all. Growing up in Marineford, he had never seen such a huge fortune in his life. Darren smiled with satisfaction. King Yaddis is so polite. Protecting members of the allied countries from harm is the unshirkable duty of our navy. The Minister of Finance smiled. Of course, who in the entire North Sea doesn't know that our admiral is selfless, honest and upright, and has devoted himself to protecting the lives and property of our North Sea people without asking for anything in return. It is a blessing for the entire North Sea to have the protection of Lord Darren. But we can't let so many soldiers of the North Sea Navy come here in vain. Hospitality is the tradition of our Kingdom of Yaddis. Please don't refuse, Lord Darren. She is quite good at talking. She is worthy of being the Minister of Finance. Darren smiled and was about to nod. Unexpectedly, Guillaume suddenly took a step forward, her pretty face full of anger, and gritted her teeth and said, "No, we can't take this money." She turned around and glared at Darren fiercely. He said angrily, "Our navy must not accept money from other channels. Darren, this is a bribe. If you dare to accept this money, I will report you directly to the headquarters." Cake next to him also shouted, "That's right, I will report you to the headquarters." As if his expression was too excited and the wound on his face was affected, he grimaced in pain and hated it. If it weren't for Darren, the bastard, he wouldn't have been killed instantly by Vinsmoke Judge and embarrassed in front of Guillaume. Hearing what the two said, the smile on the face of the Minister of Finance froze. He glanced at Darren carefully and asked respectfully, "Lord Darren, these two are?" Darren smoked a cigar and smiled with ease. "Oh, these two are Major Guillaume and Major Cake from the Navy headquarters Marineford. Well, they are now my adjutants. From the direct line of the Navy headquarters." The finance minister immediately sensed something from Darren's tone. He was able to rise to a high position in the Kingdom of Yaddis and manage a country's finances, so he must be an extremely shrewd veteran. So he immediately turned around with a smile, bowed to Guillaume and Kaji and said, "It turns out that you are the Navy gentlemen who have come all the way from the headquarters. I am really short-sighted and a little rude. I am very sorry. Guillaume said to the finance minister with a serious look. Hello, sir. I must clarify a fact here. Our navy shoulders the justice of defending peace. Protecting civilians is our responsibility and obligation, and we do not need any reward. She pointed to the glittering gold and silver treasures all over the ground, and her tone was firm. We can't accept this money, otherwise it will be the greatest insult to justice. Of course. Major Guillaume is right. The Minister of Finance agreed. However, since you two have come from afar and spared no effort, the Kingdom of Yatis will also prepare an extra small gift for you. Major Guillaume looks like a powerful swordsman. It just so happens that there is a piece of fine iron in the treasury of our kingdom, which can make a good scabbard for your sword. And Major Kaji, we also happen to have a lot of good cigars here. Guillaume. Kaji. Omega, I told you that we can't accept anything. Guillaume said angrily. The Minister of Finance was stunned, then smiled and said. Of course, in addition to the above gifts, we will also compensate you two for your hard work in this battle. There are also many fine swords in the royal treasury, which can be selected by Major Guillaume. As for Major Kaji, our royal dance troupe has prepared a wonderful performance for you. Kaji. Carrot oh carrot. Really? His eyes lit up and he blurted out. Bang. Before he finished speaking, he was kicked away by Guillaume, his head sank into the wall, and his feet dangled in the air. Your Excellency the Minister, I am seriously refusing, not asking you to pay more. Guillaume was so angry that his face turned pale, he took a deep breath, and gritted his teeth. The Minister of Finance was stunned and embarrassed. You keep postponing, isn't it just to pay more? Is it not enough? At this time, Darren couldn't stand it anymore, sighed helplessly, and spoke to help. Sorry to bother you, Mr. Minister. We all like these gifts. Please tell King Yatis that our North Sea Navy is deeply grateful for this. The Minister of Finance breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. In fact, this is all because the people are too enthusiastic and spontaneously raised funds to thank the North Sea Navy for its efforts. In addition, the royal family has prepared a banquet for you tonight. Please attend. After saying this, he bowed slightly to Darren and others, and then left quickly. When the door was closed, Guillaume finally couldn't hold back his anger, and angrily said to Darren, who sat down again and crossed his legs. Darren. Before she finished speaking, Darren waved his hand to interrupt her. Guillaume, you also see the dilemma of the finance minister. If you don't accept the money, he won't be able to report back. This is the rule of the North Sea. In their opinion, if you don't accept the money, they won't be able to rest assured. Justice doesn't work in this sea. To some extent, this is similar to giving red envelopes to doctors during surgery on Earth. If the doctor doesn't accept the red envelope, the family members will be worried. This has nothing to do with the profession. This is human nature. Seeing that Guillaume still wanted to refute, Darren shook his head. Okay, that's it, you all go get ready, you still have to attend the dinner later. Chapter 20 Inches Caring for the People, Cake. Damn Darren, you betrayed the belief in justice. You are a disgrace to the Navy. A scum of justice. Guillaume's angry curse came from behind, but Darren laughed and walked out of the palace side hall. He doesn't care what others think of him. Being too concerned about reputation will only restrict one's actions and make it impossible to let go. This is a world where the strong prey on the weak and follow the most primitive law of the jungle. Darren does not deny that there are indeed some people in the Navy who insist on justice from the bottom of their hearts, and he also sincerely expresses his gratitude to these people. Show respect. They are willing to give everything for their ideals and beliefs, to protect what they want to protect, to give their youth, energy and even their lives. Such people are indeed respectable and great. This is also the reason why Darren does not hate Guillaume, who is, in the way. Because there must be fools like Guillaume to make the world full of hope. But Darren thinks he can't do this. Because the right path is too difficult. Darren does not have the monster-level talent of Sakaski, nor does he have the rich family background and background of Guillaume. From the beginning of the journey 5 years ago, he has walked step by step to the present, especially in the chaotic waters of the North Sea. Every step he takes is extremely difficult and thrilling, like walking on a tightrope on a cliff. So he must be cautious and cautious, careful and careful. Seize power, wealth, strength, benefits and status as much as possible. And now, it's time to reap the fruits of victory in this war. Thinking so in his heart, Darren quickened his pace. Night falls. Verna, the capital of the kingdom of Yadis, is brightly lit and bustling. The royal palace and the guest hall. Nobles, celebrities, ministers, the crown prince and wealthy businessmen of the kingdom of Yadis attended the event in their best attire, toasting each other. The crystal lamp on the ceiling casts a brilliant light, reflecting the red wine in the hands of the guests into charming ripples. The guests chatted happily. I tell you, that battle was really thrilling. Germa 66 is indeed an evil army. Their commander, Vinsmoke Judge, is as powerful as a monster. On one side of the banquet hall, Kaji, who looked like a decent man in a brand new tuxedo, shook the red wine glass in his hand and boasted to a group of noble ladies and young ladies who were dressed up. You don't know, the weapon he used is an extremely cutting-edge high-tech weapon. The electric current released from the spear can directly electrocute an elephant. Hearing this, the noble ladies and young ladies covered their mouths with their hands and let out a shocked low cry. Then what? Then, Kaji deliberately lowered his voice to make his voice full of magnetism, imitating the appearance of Darren in his mind, and smiled, lightly. The power of Germa technology is indeed very strong, but I am a genius who has been tempered in the Navy headquarters. How can a mere Vinsmoke Judge be my opponent? I just kicked the guy more than 10 meters away. Facing the majesty of justice, he still wanted to struggle to death. In the end, I really thought he was too noisy, so I blocked his mouth. The ladies and young ladies all widened their eyes and looked at Kaji with bright eyes. The admiration in their eyes made the latter secretly happy. It's amazing, Major Kaji. You are worthy of being a genius of the Navy headquarters. Germa 66 is such a powerful, evil army, but it was easily defeated by you. Facing the flattery of everyone, Kaji felt that all the pores on his body were stretched out happily. The North Sea is still better. So many gorgeous noble ladies and girls, the best red wine, top-grade cigars, and wonderful song and dance performances. No wonder Darren, that bastard, has been staying in this place. As for the truth of what he said just now. Well, when the war broke out, the kingdom of Germa was some distance away from the coastline, and with the obstruction of the sea fog, even the army of the kingdom of Yadis could not see what was going on, let alone the ladies and girls in the capital Werner. Thinking about the details, Jaji took a sip of red wine, smoked a cigar with a bleak look, and sighed sadly. Do you know? I have been looking for a decent opponent all my life. I thought that coming to the North Sea would bring me some fun, but I didn't expect to be so disappointed in the end. The ladies were even more shocked when they heard the words, staring at Jaji with shining eyes, and sighed one after another. Even Major Kaji is so powerful, how powerful will Lord Darren be? Yes, Lord Darren is not only powerful, but also handsome and charming. Yes, yes. Thinking of the appearance of the highest commander of the North Sea Navy, the ladies blushed shyly on their faces, and the noble ladies were even more obsessed with their eyes, looking like they were in love. Kaji. No, didn't you hear what I said? Aren't you talking about this genius? Why are you talking about that bastard Darren again? That guy didn't even attend this banquet. Kaji couldn't help but roar in his heart, his facial muscles twitched, and his face gradually turned black. He took a puff of his cigar, his face full of resentment. That, Mr. Kaji. At this time, a timid voice suddenly sounded from behind. He turned around subconsciously and saw a girl in a white lace dress standing there with a slightly red face. Her white hands were placed in front of her body and kept stirring, exuding a shy youthful temperament. What a beautiful and pure girl. Kaji felt his heart. It was as if something had hit him, his heartbeat slowed down, and his eyes suddenly shot out a pair of red hearts. Love. This is love. He screamed wildly in his heart. That, Mr. Kaji, I want. The girl raised her eyes shyly, looked at Kaji timidly, and then quickly retracted them in fear, as naive as a frightened deer, and said softly, "I want Den Den Mushi. Contact information." She was shy. She wanted my Den Den Mushi contact information. She must have heard my achievements. She likes me. Kaki was struck by lightning, and nodded vigorously in panic. "No problem, I'll give you my private Den Den Mushi number right now." The corners of his mouth couldn't help but rise. "No, I want to ask if you know Mr. Darren's contact information." The girl shook her head with a slightly red face. Click. Jaji felt as if his heart was hit by something, his heartbeat stopped, and the red hearts in his eyes suddenly petrified and cracked. In the girl's surprised eyes. He turned around like a deflated balloon, and walked to the corner of the banquet hall with a bleak back, and then squatted there, motionless. 2 lines of tears flowed down his face unconvincingly. Not far away. Guillaume, wearing a high-cut pink evening dress, refused the invitation to dance for the 15th time, and looked at Jaji squatting in the corner with dejected black smoke, and the corners of her mouth twitched. She took a sip of red wine, as if she remembered something, gritted her teeth, and clenched her fists. On the other side. Darren also came to the port and boarded the warship. Chapter 21 What do you want? Captain Darren. On the deck of the warship, the North Sea Navy soldier on duty saw Darren's appearance and immediately raised his hand to salute solemnly. "Thank you for your hard work." Darren smiled. Everyone shook their heads and returned to their posts. The treatment of the North Sea Navy is much higher than that of the Navy of the same level in other seas, not to mention that in addition to the basic military pay, they also have fixed paid vacations, are equipped with the most sophisticated weapons, and receive the highest level of military training in the North Sea. Everyone in the North Sea Navy knows that everything they have is all thanks to their admiral. Darren walked slowly into the cabin of the warship, walked down the narrow stairs, and came to the bottom of the cabin. At the bottom of the cabin, a temporary prison has been built. The commander of Germa 66, Vinsmoke Judge, is imprisoned here. Seeing the arrival of the damn Navy, Vinsmoke Judge, who was bound by steel and even had his mouth sealed, struggled frantically, his eyes were bloodshot, and he made an unclear sound. It can be imagined that if eyes can kill, his violent and resentful eyes at this moment are enough to kill Darren 100 times. Darren waved his hand casually. The steel block that blocked Vinsmoke Judge's mouth flew out of thin air. The former immediately roared in anger. "You damn Navy kid, how dare you imprison me? Your time as the North Sea Admiral is over. The Germa Kingdom is a member of the world government. You are dead." His voice stopped abruptly, and his pupils contracted. A sharp steel bar suddenly twisted out of the cell, pierced the air, and hovered steadily between his eyebrows. In the reflection of Vinsmoke Judge's pupils, the tip of the steel bar reflected a cold light under the swaying torchlight, like a poisonous snake that chooses its prey. "Have you said enough?" Darren smiled. Vinsmoke Judge gritted his teeth. "It seems that's enough." Darren was very satisfied with his reaction. He hooked his finger and the venomous steel slowly closed. "Vinsmoke Judge, you are right. The Germa Kingdom is a member of the world government. According to the discipline of the Navy, this operation will indeed cause me a lot of trouble." Darren took out a cigar, bit it in his mouth and lit it. "But you forgot one thing." He looked at the overlord of the North Sea in front of him, who was as miserable as a dead dog, with a half-smile. "You can't represent the Kingdom of Germa." Hearing Darren's words, Vinsmoke Judge's heart suddenly jumped, and he said fiercely, "What do you mean? I am the head of the Vinsmoke family and the king of the Kingdom of Germa. How can I not represent the Kingdom of Germa?" No, Darren sneered, "you still don't understand what I mean." He slowly exhaled a puff of smoke. "This time, I seem to have killed a lot of the troops of Germa 66, but you and I both know that it's a clone soldier. As long as you have enough time and money, you can make it again in no time. In the final analysis, clone soldiers are not human beings, but weapons. And the most important thing is, the world government doesn't care about the life and death of the member states. The 5 elders don't care, and the celestial dragons don't care even more. What they care about is whether the members of the member states can regularly hand in the sky gold they need. As long as the Jerma kingdom can pay the sky gold on time, the bigwigs won't care whether the person sitting on the throne is you, Vinsmoke Judge. Vinsmoke Judge's face suddenly turned pale. Well, look, you are beginning to understand what I mean. Darren raised his hand. The steel cage that imprisoned Vinsmoke Judge suddenly spread out like a blooming flower. At the same time, the twisted metal also intertwined and gathered into a steel chair behind Darren. The free Vinsmoke Judge did not attack Darren angrily at this time, but stood there with a sullen face. He knew very well that he could not be the opponent of this man without his combat suit. Darren sat slowly on the steel chair, smoking a cigar and smiling. I believe that other nobles in the Jerma kingdom should be interested in the position of king, and they should also hope that you will die here and never appear again, right? Vinsmoke Judge was silent, his face was extremely ugly. He knew that Darren was right. The kingdom of Jerma has a long history. In addition to the Vinsmoke family, there are other noble families of all sizes. After he left the research team and returned to Jerma, he took over the power of the kingdom of Jerma with high-tech weapons. Needless to say, there was a lot of bloodshed. In the process, he also suppressed other nobles in the kingdom of Jerma and carried out a wave of cleansing. But he couldn't kill all these nobles. It can be imagined that those guys should really want to die in the hands of this navy. You dare not kill me. Vinsmoke Judge said hoarsely. Darren laughed. I admit this. After all, you are the king of a member country, and I am just a mere naval colonel. But I can hand you over to the world government. A scientist who has powerful scientific research technology and once worked with Vegapunk in the MADS team, I believe the government should be very satisfied with my move. What do you know? I finally escaped from the pursuit of the world government agents and avoided falling into the hands of the government and becoming a research tool in their hands. How did this Navy kid know such a secret event? What do you know? You don't need to care about what I know. You only need to know one thing. Cooperate with me, you can continue to be your king and commander safely, and maybe when I am in a good mood, I can help you fulfill your ambition of dominating the North Sea. Or, try to resist me. I will hand you over to the world government, and then support another noble in Jerma to be the king. As long as the amount of heavenly gold in the kingdom of Jerma increases by 20%, I believe that the government will not only not hold me accountable, but will also likely publicly reward me. After the words fell, Vinsmoke Judge fell into a long silence, his expression uncertain. Darren was not in a hurry. He just smoked a cigar there. He knew this guy's character very well. He was power-hungry and vain. Is it a fight to the death for his own face, or to lose his freedom and power? Darren believed that Vinsmoke Judge would make the right choice. Half a minute later, Vinsmoke Judge raised his head, his eyes were bloodshot, and he hoarsely said, "What do you want?" Quote. Chapter 22 Protecting the Celestial Dragons. The next day, a piece of news came from the Kingdom of Jerma, a member of the world government. Yesterday, Jerma 66 completed an open military exercise with the North Sea Navy fleet in the waters near the Kingdom of Yadis in the North Sea. In this exercise, both sides demonstrated strong military combat capabilities. The King of the Kingdom of Jerma and Commander of Jerma 66, Vinsmoke Judge, expressed his cooperation with Colonel Darren, the Admiral of the North Sea Navy, and promised to sign a long-term friendly cooperation agreement to jointly maintain the security, peace, prosperity and stability of the North Sea. In the office of the 321st Branch Base Chief, Guion and Cake looked at the latest newspaper in their hands and were dumbfounded. How is this possible? Especially, the newspaper report was accompanied by a photo of Darren and Vinsmoke Judge shaking hands under the seagull flag, which made them unable to believe their eyes. They fought to the death the day before and almost destroyed Jerma 66, but they were cooperating in a friendly manner, in just one day. Looking at the familiar, kind and enthusiastic smiles on the faces of Darren and Vinsmoke Judge in the photo, others would think they were brothers who had been separated for many years. This is just like a dream. How can this be impossible? Mr. Vinsmoke Judge is a sensible person. After my patient explanation and advice, he quickly recognized the position of our North Sea Navy and the Navy's determination to maintain justice and peace. Darren smiled and glanced at the shocked Guillaume and the other man, and slowly lit a cigar. And he also realized his mistake in starting the war and decided to correct it. Isn't this a very reasonable thing? Kaji nodded in sudden realization. Well, this is indeed reasonable. Bullshit! He gritted his teeth and said. With Vinsmoke Judge's brutal, overbearing, and unruly character and ambition, how could he be influenced by Darren's words? You are a devil fruit user who controls metal. You are not a devil fruit user. Darren, what did you do? Did you threaten him? Guillaume gritted his teeth in disbelief. You found out. Darren raised his hands with an expression of, you found out. He smiled. In fact, I didn't do anything. As I said to General Sengoku, I just made him an offer he couldn't refuse. But I didn't expect Vinsmoke Judge to be so reasonable. Guillaume and Cake. Looking at Darren's silent smile, they knew it was unlikely to get anything out of him. Although I don't know what method this guy used to make Vinsmoke Judge surrender, the final result is still perfect. They prevented this war. Hundreds of thousands of people in the Kingdom of Yatis were not involved in the war. The Kingdom of Germa gave up the pursuit of the North Sea Navy. Guillaume received several silk banners sent by the royal family of Yatis. There were several boxes of fine wine and good cigarettes in Kaji's mansion. Everything seemed to be developing in a beautiful and happy direction. What the hell? Guillaume looked at Darren's confident smile that was leisurely and in control of the overall situation, and felt indignant and crazy. Coercion, inducement, deception, violence, bloodshed, deceiving superiors and subordinates. Obviously, these are extremely bad things, words that have nothing to do with the righteousness she believes in, but in the hands of Darren, this bastard, they have become the best means to successfully govern the North Sea. This was totally incompatible with all the education she had received in the past. It completely overturned her worldview. Bulu bulu. Bulu bulu. At this time, the call of the military Den Den Mushi suddenly sounded. Darren picked up the Den Den Mushi and connected the call. I am Darren. The hearty laughter of Admiral Sengoku of the Navy headquarters came from the Den Den Mushi. Ha 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 ha, Darren, you little brat, you are really worthy of being a subordinate that I rely on. You have done a great job on this matter. Guillaume and Cake rolled their eyes at the same time, their heads full of black lines. They clearly remembered how Admiral Sengoku was furious at the Den Den Mushi yesterday. All glory belongs to justice. This is all thanks to Admiral Sengoku's guidance. Darren said modestly. Zongguo smiled with satisfaction. I really didn't make a mistake. Now it seems that it was the right decision for me to send those two little guys, Guillaume and Kaji, to the North Sea. Those two little guys are really a headache. Kaji is lazy and always wants to steal my cigars. And what about Guillaume? She looks too much like her sister and is too naive. Listening to Zongguo's complaints, Darren glanced at Guillaume and Kaji, whose faces were gradually turning black, and a strange look appeared on his face. In short, those two little guys are still very immature. If you have time, take them out to see more. Zongguo didn't realize the seriousness of the matter, and he became more and more excited. Ahem. Cake couldn't help but cough twice when he noticed that Guillaume's eyes were getting colder and colder, and he began to exude a chilling murderous intent. Zongguo. The military Den Den Mushi fell silent. General Sengoku, I heard that you are not satisfied with me. Guillaume said to the Den Den Mushi expressionlessly. Sengoku. Hello, hello. Why can't I hear clearly? Hey, the signal seems not very good. Can't hear clearly. Darren, you stinky boy, did you hear what I said just now? Take good care of Guillaume and Kaji for me, they are the future of the Navy and the hope of justice. Hello, hello. Why is the signal not connected? Blue. The Den Den Mushi fell asleep. The communication was interrupted. Guillaume. Kaji. Darren. The three looked at each other. The flying squirrel, who had been standing by and not speaking, covered his forehead with pain. This acting is too poor. But less than a minute later, the military Den Den Mushi rang again. Darren answered again. General Sengoku. Well, Darren, I almost forgot to tell you that there is a very important mission. Sengoku looked as if nothing had happened just now, and his tone was serious. General Sengoku, you tell me. Darren said. Sengoku said in a deep voice. Bandai Waldo attacked a world government ship a few days ago. The world noble celestial dragon Surge Saint on the ship was shipwrecked and drifted to Batia Island in the North Sea. The headquarters has received the government's order, and I am now on my way to the North Sea. Darren frowned when he heard this. He remembered the news he saw in the newspaper 2 days ago. The great pirate, world destroyer, Bandai Waldo sank the world government ship, and the world noble celestial dragon was furious and offered a high reward of 200 million baileys. The ward pirates may become the biggest threat to the government. General Sengoku, what do I need to do? Hunt down, world destroyer, Bandai Waldo. Darren blew out a dragon-like smoke from his mouth. Eyes half closed. Zongguo shook his head and said. No, although your strength is good, it is still a long way from that guy Bandai Waldo. It is my mission to defeat Bandai Waldo. And your mission is to set off immediately to Batia Island to protect Surge Saint. The CP department has sent personnel to the North Sea to escort, but before they arrive at Batia Island, the government needs the nearest navy to protect the personal safety of Surge Saint. Ask for everything, thank you very much. Chapter 23 Worthy of being a genius. Blue sky and blue sea, white clouds floating. The huge warship sailed at a steady speed on the endless blue sea, dragging a long white trail at its tail. In the dark cabin, Darren sat cross-legged on the deck alone with his eyes closed. The light of the oil lamp cast a vague shadow of his figure on the wall of the cabin. 3 smooth metal balls floated in the air, moving centripetally around his body. If someone were here, they would probably be shocked. Because the 3 metal balls flying around the naval colonel kept the relative distance between each other absolutely consistent even during the movement. This requires extremely high control ability. Time passed by minute. With Darren's gentle finger hook, the 3 metal balls kept changing shape like liquid, sometimes stretching into sharp spikes, twisting and wriggling like sinister iron chains, and sometimes spreading out like solid steel shields. At a certain moment, Darren slowly opened his eyes. The 3 metal balls suddenly gathered together, and finally changed into a silver metal wristband, solidified on the naval colonel's right wrist. He exhaled gently, and a satisfied smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Physical fitness, 60.451. Strength, 55.890. Speed, 58.048. Fruit, 71.871. Only real combat and fighting can force me to grow faster. Darren used his insight talent to sense his physical condition and couldn't help but sigh. In the past few months, his training progress has slowed down a lot, and even his speed and fruit ability have almost stagnated. Although his physical data are still improving slowly as he continues to increase his training intensity, the speed of improvement is not satisfactory. However, after the battle with Germa 66, Darren's physical fitness and strength have increased by more than 1 point. If it is training, it will take at least a month to achieve the same effect. It's a pity that Germa 66 is too weak to let me really get into the state. Darren smiled and lit a cigar. Germa 66 and Vinsmoke Judge are not weak, but their abilities are too restrained by Germa's technological weapons. There is no doubt that if it were not for their appearance, with the military strength of Vinsmoke Judge and Germa 66, killing the kings of the 4 countries in the North Sea, and even dominating the North Sea would not be a big problem. I really miss the time when I fought with that madman Sakazuki. Darren's eyes were a little emotional. Before Sakazuki left the North Sea and went to the headquarters for training, he often trained and sparred with the former without using the Devil Fruit ability. Of course, their sparring was fatal in the eyes of others. After all, Sakazuki never held back. If you are not careful, you may be killed, and then it will become a tragic accident. During that time, although he was seriously injured almost every day, the hardy fight and the state of constantly forcing himself to break through the limit in the crisis of life and death made Darren intoxicated. That was also the period when his strength leapt the fastest. It's a pity that it's all in the past. After training in the headquarters officer training camp, under the guidance of the former Navy Admiral Zephyr, Sakaski is now estimated to have mastered Haki. The distance between him and him has been infinitely widened. After all, Teacher Kaido said, Haki is the most powerful ability in this sea. Thinking of this, Darren slowly stood up. He was not in a hurry. The third officer training camp is about to start, and if nothing unexpected happens, he has already obtained a quota. Although his talent is far inferior to monsters like Sakaski and Borsellino, Darren believes that with his own ability, he can definitely win a place in the Navy. Before that, he must build up the North Sea Fleet. Make this powerful fleet that will be armed with Germa technology into a military force that belongs only to him and only obeys his orders. A firm light flashed in Darren's deep eyes. He walked out of the cabin and opened the door. As the sun shone down, Navy soldiers were patrolling outside the cabin, performing routine maintenance on guns and artillery. On the spacious deck, Kaji and Gion were practicing with sweat pouring down their cheeks. The former was carrying a 1-ton, gnashing his teeth and doing handstand push-ups with a ferocious face. The latter held a long sword in his hand, with a serious look, practicing swordsmanship in a methodical manner, and the sharp blade cut through the air, making bursts of sharp whistling sounds. Are they both crazy? Darren looked at the scene in confusion and asked the flying squirrel who was walking over. The flying squirrel rubbed his temple helplessly. The Germa 66 incident was a big stimulus to them, especially Kaji. After returning, he practiced like crazy. Darren couldn't help laughing when he remembered the miserable look of Kaji being stepped on the face by Vinsmoke Judge and kicked away. Boom! At this time, a magnificent water column tens of meters high suddenly exploded on one side of the warship. The raging waves surged up, and the whole warship suddenly shook. What happened? Is it an enemy attack? No, it's a Sea King. The faces of the sailors on the deck changed slightly, and they quickly took action, drawing their sabers, raising their spears, and adjusting the cannons on the warships. A huge shadow slowly emerged from the splashing sea water, projected in front of everyone, and almost covered the entire warship. The scorching sun above seemed to disappear, replaced by a behemoth that was 60 or 70 meters high. The black scales and gills looked like a giant eel. The lantern-sized pupils looked down at the sailors on the deck, and slowly opened their bloody mouths full of sharp teeth. A small sea king. Darren looked at the strange fish in front of him with interest. During this period of time, Vegapunk had not yet developed a method to load seastone on the bottom of the warship to allow the Navy to survive the doldrums. In other words, at this time, the Sea King creatures can still sense the breath of the warship. The flying squirrel next to him subconsciously reached out his hand and grasped the handle of the saber at his waist, and was about to attack. Darren held his shoulder and shook his head. The flying squirrel was stunned, but heard a strange cry from the deck. Ha 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 ha. Just in time. Let me use you, a little reptile, to verify the results of this genius's practice. The moment the arrogant laughter came out, Kaji's figure stepped on the railing of the warship and shot up like a cannonball. Roar! A touch of human anger flashed in the blood-red eyes of the Sea King creature, as if it was angered by the arrogance of the ant in front of it, and suddenly let out a deafening roar. The majestic sound waves suddenly pressed down, causing many Navy officers on the deck to fall to the ground. The Sea King opened its bloody mouth full of sharp teeth and swallowed the high-jumping Kaji in one gulp. Bang! Kaji punched out. The ripples of air waves visible to the naked eye spread out. The Sea King's pupils froze, and his expression became confused. Crackling. Under Kaji's punch, its teeth continued to crack densely and then shattered. Sea King. Hot tears brewed in its eyeballs. Just then. Kang! The buzzing sound of the famous sword being unsheathed suddenly exploded. The golden famous sword tore through the air, and a golden sword light whistled through the air and flashed in the void. Swish! A thin and long blood mark slowly appeared on the neck of the poor Sea King creature. Cut it in two with one sword. Then. Boom! The huge head of the Sea King separated from its body and fell to the sea, stirring up turbulent waves again. The blood that kept pouring out dyed the sea red. On the deck, Kaji landed steadily and posed in a self-proclaimed handsome pose. Guillaume sheathed his sword with an indifferent look, and his cape fluttered behind him. The other Navy officers stared at Guillaume and Kaji, who easily solved the Sea King monster. After a second of silence, they all cheered with joy. Some people even threw out the fishing net swiftly to prepare for a meal. You are indeed a genius of the headquarters. A future candidate for admiral. Darren looked at this scene and murmured to himself with emotion. Through their actions, Darren could tell at a glance that their strength had clearly improved a lot compared to when they first came to the North Sea. Kaji's strength, speed and physical skills had increased by at least 30%. As for Guillaume, he even comprehended, flying slash, was able to slash out sword rays, and stepped into the realm of swordsmanship in one fell swoop. It's only been a few days. This terrifying talent, even if not as good as monsters, like Sakaski and Borsellino, is not far behind. Ha 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 ha. Darren, did you see that? Kaji walked over with a proud face, raised his hands and bent his arms, showing his biceps. Such a big Sea King, this genius broke all his teeth with one punch, can you? Boom. At this moment, as if attracted by the blood of the Sea King, the surging waves exploded again on the sea. 1, 2, 3. A full 8 Sea King creatures with a height of more than 100 meters raised their heads and roared out from the undulating sea surface, echoing each other and roaring loudly that shook the world. As the huge body twisted and rolled, the sea surface was stirred up by huge waves, rushing towards the warship. The small warship was shaking and trembling in front of the 8 larger Sea Kings. Darren waved his hand. The metal wrist guard on his arm suddenly fell off, and then twisted and stretched like a living thing into a sharp spear, suddenly shooting through the air. Sharp explosions continued to explode, and under the force of the terrifying magnetic field, the surrounding void continued to bloom with white ripples wherever the metal spear passed. The speed climbed to the extreme in an instant. No one could see its trajectory clearly. Everyone on the deck only felt a flash in front of their eyes, as if something was repeatedly passing through the void, like a silver phantom. The 8 roaring Sea Kings paused. Swish. The surface of their bodies continued to explode with dense and tiny blood holes, and high-pressure blood flow was sprayed out like a sieve. Boom. The huge monsters collapsed one after another, stirring up water columns. Darren recalled the metal spear, condensed it into a wristband again, and put it on carelessly. Behind him was the picture of 8 lifeless Sea Kings falling into the sea. He turned his head to look at the stunned Kaji and said, "Major Kaji, what did you want to say just now?" Kaji's mouth twitched and smiled. "I said you can do better than me." Darren glanced at him, patted his shoulder, and looked into the distance. The outline of an island gradually emerged on the sea in the distance. "Get ready, we are about to land on the island." The corner of his mouth raised a hint of sarcasm. "Our mission this time is to protect the great, sacred and noble celestial dragons. Please everything, thank you." Chapter 24 Arrival. North Sea, Batia Island. The warship slowly sailed into the port. The anchor was dropped, and the members of the North Sea 321 Branch Navy, led by Darren, slowly walked down from the bordering board. As soon as he stepped onto the land of Batia Island, Darren showed a look of surprise. "It seems to be different from the Batia Island in my memory." Batia Island is one of the transportation hubs of several well-known routes in the North Sea. Although its trade throughput is far less than that of some commercially prosperous islands on the Grand Route, it is also among the best in the North Sea. Many merchant ships and trade caravans will pass through Batia Island for supplies, which in turn supports the economic development of this island. However, where wealth flows, there will naturally be dirty dealings, which is common sense in the world. Because of the wealth and prosperity of Batia Island and the convenience of transportation, this place has naturally become a place to make money and hide dirt. The mafia, underground forces, illegal transactions, and even pirates looting have become the norm here. In order to balance the power on Batia Island, Darren had spent a lot of effort and energy. Even so, Darren's impression of Batia Island was still a prosperous and chaotic place. But the scene in front of him was somewhat beyond his expectations. The originally crowded and oil-stained island port was completely renewed, with clusters of flowers. The streets were unusually clean, without any garbage piled up, and the stalls and shops on both sides of the street were now neat and orderly. The old buildings were painted with new paint, and the houses were painted with white walls and blue roofs, which looked quite impressive. In front of the gate to the town, a brand new arch was temporarily built, 10 meters high, with colorful words, "Welcome Saint Serds," hanging on it. Because the celestial dragons were shipwrecked and drifted to Batia Island, the mayor of this island immediately issued a decree to rectify the city appearance, and spent a large amount of tax money to renovate some dilapidated buildings. The flying squirrel walked to Darren's side and explained in a low voice. As for the color of this house, it is said that the city government wants to imitate the decoration style of the Holy Land of Marihoa, so that the world's nobles can feel at home here. Guion and Kaji on the side were stunned. Darren couldn't help but smile. It seems that no matter which world, there is such a thing as image project. But this is normal. The celestial dragons call themselves gods in this sea and have supreme power. For a small place like the North Sea, the local governors have very few opportunities to see the true appearance of the world's nobles with their own eyes on weekdays. Now it happens that a celestial dragon who has encountered an accident has come to the area under his jurisdiction. Of course, the mayor must perform well, even if it is to strive for a good impression. Maybe when the nobles of the world are happy, a casual word can make him reach the peak of his life. Interesting. Darren smiled and nodded, turned to look at Guion and others, and ordered. You should take the troops to station first, open a protection circle around the activity area of Sild Saint, pay attention to checking suspicious people, and ensure that no emergencies occur. Although he is not interested in protecting the celestial dragons who are like pigs, if possible, he even wants to kill one or two. No, however, since this is an order from the headquarters, Darren will naturally do his best. After all, at the moment, this operation mission is likely to determine his political future in the Navy. If something happens to the celestial dragons under his protection, it is estimated that even Sengoku will not be able to protect him. Darren does not want to leave the Navy. Being a pirate has no future, and he does not want to be chased by the Navy all over the sea. Darren thinks that he is not a good person, but he still has a bottom line. He can't do such things as running to be a pirate and robbing civilians. Not to mention that for a time traveler like him who does not have a golden finger, the Navy with a relatively complete training system is undoubtedly the best choice. The most important thing is that he has invested too much energy and effort in the North Sea, and it is impossible to give up. What about you? Guion frowned and looked at Darren. She naturally heard about the bad character of the group of celestial dragons, and of course she was not willing to protect them in her heart. I have to go to our mayor to hand over the task first. After all, it is the militia of the municipal government that is responsible for the security of the celestial dragons. Darren smiled and said to Guion and Kaji who was looking around, since you are here, you have to say hello to the local government anyway. You don't have to worry. The specific security work will be mainly carried out by Major Flying Squirrel. You just need to assist from the side. After all, you two have just come to Beihai and are not familiar with the business here. After speaking, Darren turned his eyes to Flying Squirrel. They will be handed over to you. Flying Squirrel nodded. Seeing that Darren had already given the order directly, Guion didn't force it. He stayed there silently and watched Darren get on a carriage and go away in the direction of the municipal government. Well, let's go this way, Major Guion, Major Cake. The flying squirrel greeted with a smile, then turned around and set off with his subordinates to the designated destination. He knew that Darren was going to see the mayor to discuss some things, and it would not be convenient to bring Guion and Cake with him. Guion and Cake looked at each other, hesitant to say anything, and finally said nothing and quickly followed. Batiar Island. City Hall. Darren walked into the mayor's office under the guidance of a sexy secretary in professional attire. The office was decorated in a high-end and magnificent style. A fur carpet was laid on the smooth marble floor, and oil paintings that were obviously valuable were hung on the wall. I'm sorry for not welcoming you, Colonel Darren. It didn't take long before a flattering laugh sounded. A middle-aged man in a suit came in sweating profusely. His fat body made his high-end suit bulge out, like a ball. Mayor Hunter is busy with government affairs. I am the one who disturbed him. Darren smiled, took the cigar handed over by Mayor Hunter respectfully, and sat down on the soft leather sofa without any hesitation. No, Colonel Darren, you also understand. Lord Shield Saint has come to Batia Island, and we are already busy here. Hunter took out a silk square handkerchief from his pocket, wiped the sweat on his face, and smiled. Darren nodded and lit the cigar. I understand. After all, this is a rare event in decades. I was quite surprised to see the brand new Bardia Island on my way here. I guess Surge Saint will be satisfied with your arrangement, Mr. Mayor. Hunter was overjoyed when he heard this. That's good, that's good. He took out a document with both hands and handed it to Darren. Colonel Darren, this is the situation of Bardia Island in the past 6 months. Watching Darren take the document and flip through it casually, Hunter explained carefully. Under your deterrence, the 2 major mafia families in Bardia Island have maintained relative restraint in the past 6 months and paid the prescribed taxes on time. Darren glanced at the number at the end of the document and smiled with satisfaction. Well, they are still well behaved. Hunter bowed. Of course, who dares not to give you face in the North Sea? He said with trepidation, bending even lower. Others may not know, but as the mayor, how could Hunter not know the methods of the man in front of him? There were many mafia gangs in Batia Island, fighting each other, and fighting for territory. Bloodshed was the norm. Until a year ago, Darren, the newly appointed head of the 321st branch, came to Batia Island and almost uprooted the mafia with the most powerful and ruthless means. To this day, Hunter still clearly remembers the hellish scene. The streets were full of blood and corpses piled up like mountains. The man in front of him stood there covered in blood, and the 2 remaining mafia family leaders knelt down in front of him trembling. From that day on, there were no more gang feuds and territorial disputes on Batia Island. The 2 remaining mafia families divided fixed territories between each other, kept to themselves, and regularly handed over half of their income as taxes. Because the gang fights were stopped, civilians were able to rest and recuperate, the social environment was stable, and the economy of Batia Island also developed vigorously. Well, I still say the same thing, please tell them for me. Galoon slowly exhaled a puff of smoke. As long as they don't go too far, I will turn a blind eye. As long as they behave themselves. There is always money to be made. But I don't want to see any bloodshed and tragic deaths of civilians in my jurisdiction. He smiled. After all, I am a righteous navy. Isn't that right, Mayor Hunter? Hunter nodded in fear and smiled apologetically. That's for sure. In the North Sea, who doesn't know that Colonel Darren is a symbol of justice? Chapter 25 The Little Girl Buying Flowers. On the other side. The 3 flying squirrels, with hundreds of Navy soldiers, were walking on the busy streets of the town, heading towards the residence of Shield Saint. Guillaume looked worried, looking at the back of the flying squirrel walking in front of him. She felt something was wrong, and she always suspected that Darren had deliberately sent her and Kaji away and acted alone. Big sister, you are so beautiful. At this time, a childish voice sounded from the side, interrupting Guillaume's thoughts. Guillaume was stunned and turned around. What came into view was a little girl wearing a simple floral dress, carrying a backpack behind her, which contained packaged red roses. The little girl looked only 7 or 8 years old, with big, shining eyes. She bowed to Guillaume politely and said, "Do you want to buy flowers?" Looking at the cute little girl, Guillaume's heart was about to melt. A gentle smile appeared on his face. He half squatted down and touched her hair. "Little sister, how much are you spending?" As if seeing the long knife hanging on Guillaume's waist, the little girl said timidly. "Sister, 200 Baileys each, okay." Guillaume pouted sneered. "You shouldn't ask me this." Aware of the little girl's eyes, she smiled gently. "Don't worry, I'm a Navy, I'm here to protect you. I'll only use this knife against bad guys." "Little girl, Really? Guillaume nodded and smiled. Of course, this is what we Navy should do. She looked at the flowers the little girl was carrying. Give me one. Guillaume took out 200 Baileys and put them in the little girl's hand. The little girl looked up in surprise, then put down her schoolbag awkwardly, and picked carefully with her little face. Well, this one is the most beautiful. She picked out a red rose that was obviously the most brilliant, raised her hands high, and handed it to Guillaume. Guillaume took it and asked with a smile. Little sister, why are you selling flowers at such a young age? The little girl smiled sweetly and replied. Leah is not young anymore, she can help her father. She looked at the roses in her backpack with pride. These are the flowers my father planted, as beautiful as my sister. Guillaume laughed. So that's how it is your father a flower farmer? Where's your mother? Mom. The little girl's eyes darkened. Mom is sick, and my father told me that she went to a very far place for treatment. Guillaume was stunned, with sadness flashing in his eyes. Then the little girl turned around and looked at Kaji next to her, bowed politely and asked. Uncle, are you buying flowers? Kaji's face darkened. The corner of his eye twitched, and he squatted down, with a self-proclaimed friendly smile on his face. Little sister, I'm less than 20 years old, you should call me brother. The little girl opened her eyes wide in surprise, carefully looked at the man in front of her wearing a brown hat and biting a cigarette, and finally shook her head firmly. No, uncle, you don't look like a brother, but an uncle. Kaji. He gritted his teeth and forced a smile with a stiff expression. Little sister, if you call me brother, I will buy all your flowers. The little girl's eyes lit up, but soon she became entangled again. A pair of white and tender hands kept stirring in front of her, with a face full of grievances. Although Leah really wants to sell all the flowers. But my father told me not to lie. Bang! Kaji fell to the ground. He got up again and said viciously. Damn it! Open your eyes and look, I'm only 19 years old. He screamed madly. Okay. Seeing the pitiful look of the little girl who was about to cry, Guillaume kicked Kaji away angrily, squatted down and touched the little girl's head. Although that uncle is a little ugly, he is also a good person. Don't be afraid. The little girl blinked her big eyes and nodded blankly. Then she spread out the 200 Baileys that Guillaume earned from selling flowers in her hands, counted them clumsily, and then took out 40 Baileys and put them in her left pocket, and the remaining 160 Baileys in her right pocket. Guillaume asked curiously. Why do you want to separate the money? The little girl said seriously. Dad said that we should hand in part of our income, so that those with weapons will not come to trouble us. Guillaume's face changed slightly. But at this time, a man ran over anxiously, took the little girl's hand, and bowed to Guillaume in fear. I'm sorry, Navy Lord, Leah is ignorant and talked nonsense. After saying this, he picked up his daughter and ran away. Goodbye, big sister. Goodbye, uncle. The little girl in her father's arms smiled and waved at Guillaume and Kaji. Damn it, I said I'm a brother, not an uncle. Kaji said hatefully. Guillaume looked at the father and daughter going away, but seemed to realize something. Hand over part of the income. People with weapons. Taxes. She frowned, walked forward quickly, and stopped the flying squirrel who was commanding his subordinates to deploy tasks not far away. Major Flying Squirrel, tell me, is Darren doing something shady again? Guillaume looked serious. The flying squirrel looked at Guillaume, who was looking serious, and said with a headache. Major Guillaume, as the highest commander of the entire North Sea Navy, Base Commander Darren naturally has things to deal with. As his adjutants, our primary responsibility is to execute the orders he issued. Our most important task at the moment is to carry out the security work of Sild Saint. Guillaume shook his head stubbornly. No, I want to know what Darren is doing. Since the order from the headquarters has been issued, then Marineford must have communicated with the governor of Batia Island, and Darren does not need to go there in person to take over. Since the task of protecting Sild Saint is so important, Darren, as the first person in charge of the operation, should not leave. She clenched her teeth and questioned. Darren, did he go to collect taxes from those mafia families from the mayor? The flying squirrel was stunned and a little surprised. Although Guyon's thinking is often very naive, she is indeed very smart and actually guessed Darren's purpose. I knew it. Guyon clenched her fists fiercely. From the reaction of the flying squirrel, she has already got a definite answer. How can you do this? Although the harm of the mafia to civilians is not as great as that of pirates, their existence will also cause civilians to be oppressed and exploited. Guyon questioned angrily. Forget about Darren. That depraved and corrupt bastard is hopeless. But Major Flying Squirrel, how can you be like him and go along with the mafia family? We are a righteous navy. Our responsibility is to protect civilians, not to oppress and exploit them. She wanted to question Darren long before, but the sudden war of Germa 66 interrupted her. The flying squirrel looked at the anger and determination in Guyon's eyes and suddenly sighed. It's such an admirable belief. It's a pity that pure justice is the most useless thing in a place like Beihai. Major Guyon, do you see this street? He didn't answer directly, but pointed to the street in front. Can you please tell me what you see? Guyon was stunned and looked around. There were shops on both sides of the street, displaying a wide range of goods, and there were crowds of people. Young parents were playing with their children, and laughter was everywhere. A peaceful and tranquil scene. Peace. For some reason, Guyon's voice was a little lower. Yes, the flying squirrel shook his head. But you don't know that a year ago, this street was a notorious lawless street on Batia Island. It was once full of liars, gangsters, fraudsters, murderers. Full of darkness and chaos that a genius like you from Marineford could never imagine. Guyon opened her mouth, but before she could say anything, the flying squirrel pointed to a building not far away. It was a hospital. That place was originally a shelter for refugees and vagrants. He pointed to the direction of the port where they landed in the distance. The port where we docked the warship used to be a stinking ditch full of corpses. The road we walked on was a stinking garbage station a year ago. Looking at Guyon and Cake, whose faces were gradually changing, Flying Squirrel let out a long breath. Batia Island was one of the most chaotic transit points in the North Sea. Pirates plundered recklessly, and dozens of large and small mafia families were rampant here. Gunshots rang out here almost every day, and the crime rate of the entire island exceeded 30%. More than half of the children joined the ranks of pirates, swindlers, gangsters and gamblers for various reasons before they reached adulthood. Batia Island, with its prosperous trade, is, to some extent, a hotbed of crime. How could this be possible? Guyon and Cake murmured with pale faces. They looked at the prosperous business and thriving trade island in front of them and could not connect it with the dirty and chaotic picture described by the flying squirrel. But over the past few years, didn't the North Sea Navy send troops to suppress it? Guyon suddenly gritted his teeth and said. Send troops. Of course there is. A mocking smile appeared on the corner of the flying squirrel's mouth. When Major General Sakaski was in office, he led troops to fight against pirates and mafia more than once, killing them in a bloodbath, leaving almost no one alive. Of course, this process also caused many casualties among civilians and officials, and also caused a lot of political pressure, which eventually led to his transfer to the headquarters. But, at least it was effective, right? Guyon said again. Effect? No. The situation on Batia Island has become worse. The flying squirrel's expression was quite complicated. That's impossible. Guyon and Cake retorted in unison. Since Sakaski sent troops to fight, it would have a deterrent effect anyway. How could the situation on Batia Island become worse? They simply couldn't believe it. It's really hard to believe. If I hadn't experienced it myself, I probably wouldn't believe it, but it's true. Flying Squirrel sighed. Because pirates and mafia families are endless. At least in the North Sea. Less than half a year after Major General Sakaski sent out his troops, a large number of gangsters, lawless elements, criminals, liars, pirates, mafia members, once again swarmed into this prosperous trade island like locusts, turning it into a chaotic lawless place again. In fact, no one can solve these problems. Major General Borsellino's indulgence policy has no effect, and Major General Sakaski's, iron-blooded, policy has no effect. Until Darren was promoted to the base chief of the 321st branch a year ago. Flying Squirrel said lightly, and when he mentioned that name, his eyes gradually exuded deep admiration. He led the Navy to suppress the rampant pirates and mafia families in this place, leaving only 2 mafia families and dividing them into distinct territories. He once told me, pirates, mafia. These things can never be eradicated in any era. The key to governance lies in control, at least in the North Sea. After retaining 2 relatively easy-to-control mafia families, Colonel Darren completely let go, allowing them to maintain a hostile balance and unify the underground forces of this island. So the situation finally stabilized. For their own interests, and fearing Colonel Darren's bloody cleansing, the 2 major mafia families cooperated peacefully. There is no more gang fighting, civilians can recuperate, the economy and trade of Batia Island have achieved long-term development, and the appearance of the city has undergone earth-shaking changes. The crime rate that originally exceeded 30% has dropped to less than 5%. Katakana middle dot katakana middle dot katakana middle dot.